From the moment Elvis Presley first swiveled his hips on national television to the day Lady Gaga stepped onto an awards show stage wearing a dress made entirely of raw meat, American music has always had a flair for the spectacularly strange. These are the moments that stop us in our tracks, the images that burn themselves into our collective memory, making us wonder what on earth could possibly happen next. But what if those unforgettable spectacles are just the tip of the iceberg? What if the true, bizarre heart of American music history isn't found in the spotlight, but hidden in the shadows just offstage, in the forgotten recording studios, the chaotic tour buses, and the secret lives of the icons we thought we knew? That's the journey we're embarking on today, a deep dive into the underbelly of the soundtrack of a nation, to uncover the stories that are too weird, too wild, and too unbelievable to make it into the official biographies. We've searched through decades of history to bring you 33 of the most jaw-dropping American music stories ever told. Forget the polished legends you learned in school. We're pulling back the curtain to share the backstage secrets, the outrageous accidents, and the utterly paranormal encounters that truly shaped the music we love. This isn't just a collection of odd facts. Each of these 33 tales is a pivotal moment with real consequences, a bizarre twist of fate that created a chart-topping hit, sparked a career-ending scandal, or sent a superstar's life spiraling in a direction nobody could have predicted. These are the threads that, when pulled, reveal a completely different pattern in the fabric of American culture, showing how chaos, coincidence, and sheer weirdness are just as responsible for our national playlist as talent and ambition. So get ready for a ride through a history you never knew existed. We're going to meet a blues legend who made a deal with the devil at a dusty crossroads, witness a pop explosion born from a technical malfunction, and uncover the political protest hidden inside one of the most innocent-sounding love songs of all time. This is the hidden side of American music, a world where reality is often stranger than any fiction, and every hit record has a secret story waiting to be told. The rhythm of America is built on these weird and wonderful foundations, and it's time we listened a little closer to the strange beats that drive it all. One of the most enduring tragedies in American music began not with a crash, but with a feeling of profound unease. In the freezing winter of 1959, the Winter Dance Party Tour was a grueling affair, a chaotic caravan of musicians bouncing across the Midwest in buses with faulty heaters, their breath visible in the frigid air. Buddy Holly, already a massive star at just 22 years old, was exhausted and had come down with a cold. The night before the fateful flight, he reportedly confided in friends about a vivid, disturbing dream. He saw a fireball falling from the sky, a premonition of a plane crash so unsettling that the next morning he made a decision. Frustrated with the broken-down tour bus, he chartered a small, 4-seat aircraft to fly himself and 2 of his band members to the next tour stop in Moorhead, Minnesota, hoping to get a good night's sleep and do some laundry. But the dream lingered with him. Just before the flight, he turned to one of his tour mates and half-jokingly, half-seriously mentioned that maybe they should all just take the bus instead. It was a fleeting moment of doubt, a chill running down the spine of rock and roll itself, but the practical need for comfort and a break from the road won out. The finality of what happened next hinges on a simple, heartbreaking game of chance. There were only 3 seats available on that small Beechcraft Bonanza. Buddy Holly had secured one for himself and his guitarist, Tommy Allsup. The 3rd seat was meant for Waylon Jennings, Holly's bassist, but in a twist of selfless solidarity, Jennings gave up his spot to J. P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, who was suffering from the flu. That left 1 seat contested. Richie Valens, the 17-year-old sensation behind the hit La Bamba, had never flown in a small plane before and was eager for the experience. He repeatedly pestered Tommy Allsup for his seat. Finally, Allsup agreed to settle it with a coin toss right there on the tarmac. Valens called heads. The coin spun in the air, landed, and showed heads, with a triumphant shout of, "That's the first time I've ever won anything in my life." Richie Valens took his place on the plane. That single flip of a 50-cent piece sealed the fates of three young legends. Just after 1 in the morning on February 3, 1959, the plane took off into a light snowstorm. It climbed for only a few moments before plummeting into a cornfield less than 6 miles from the airport. There were no survivors. The news of the crash that killed Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Richie Valens sent a shockwave through a nation whose youth were just embracing rock and roll as their own soundtrack. The event was so culturally seismic that it needed a name, and it found one over a decade later in Don McLean's epic song, American Pie, which immortalized the tragedy as the day the music died. But beyond the song, the crash created a powerful and lasting mythos. It wasn't just an accident, it felt like a punctuation mark, an abrupt end to the first, innocent chapter of rock and roll. The eerie premonitions, the chilling coin toss, these details transformed a terrible accident into a story of fate, a dark legend that serves as a permanent reminder of how fragile genius can be and how the brightest flames can be extinguished in a moment. While the story of the day the music died represents a tragic end to one era of youthful innocence, the very next chapter of American pop would begin with a completely different kind of fabrication, one born not in a garage but in a boardroom. As Beatlemania swept the nation, television producers Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson saw an opportunity. They conceived a madcap television show about a fictional struggling rock band, inspired by the zany comedy of the Beatles' own film, A Hard Day's Night. But this wasn't just a show about a band. The plan was to cast 4 young actors to become the band, a manufactured product designed to sell both advertising and records. An ad was placed in the trade publications calling for folk and roll musicians and singers for acting roles in new TV series. The 4 who were chosen, Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork, were, for the most part, talented performers, but they were initially hired to be the faces for a machine. The music on their first albums was primarily played by a crack team of studio session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew, with the Monkees often brought in only to add their lead vocals. The formula was a spectacular success. The TV show was a hit, and their singles like Last Train to Clarksville and I'm a Believer shot to the top of the charts. But the very success they achieved created a massive backlash. As the truth about their lack of instrumental involvement leaked out, the press and the public turned on them with a surprising ferocity. Critics derided them as the Prefab Four, a cheap, corporate imitation of the authentic rock and roll experience represented by the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. This criticism cut deep for the members, especially Michael Nesmith, who was a serious songwriter and musician in his own right before joining the group. They were trapped in a gilded cage, enjoying immense fame while being denied any artistic credibility. The man holding the keys to that cage was the show's music supervisor, Don Kirshner, a legendary figure in the industry who controlled the songwriting and production with an iron fist, seeing the Monkees as performers in his hit-making operation, not as artists. The tension exploded during a meeting at Kirshner's New York office in early 1967. Kirshner had arranged for the group to record a new single, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You, written by the prolific hitmaker Neil Diamond. The problem was, he had already released the song as a single without the group's knowledge or consent, a move that completely bypassed them. According to band lore, an enraged Nesmith confronted Kirshner, famously punching a hole in a wall and declaring, "That could have been your face, man." While the wall punching may be apocryphal, the rebellion was very real. The Monkees, led by Nesmith and backed by Tork and Dolenz, demanded creative control. They insisted that they were capable of playing their own instruments and writing their own songs, and they wanted the next album to prove it. The showdown was a success. Don Kirshner was fired from the project. Liberated from their puppet strings, the Monkees retreated to a studio and, in a whirlwind week of intense collaborative work, created the album Headquarters. For the first time, they played all the instruments themselves, with only minimal help from a session musician on bass. The album was raw, a little rough around the edges, and bursting with a palpable sense of joy and liberation. It wasn't just a collection of pop songs, it was a statement of independence. Upon its release in May 1967, Headquarters shot to #1 on the Billboard charts, a vindication of their artistic gamble. For a brief, shining moment, the Prefab Four had transformed themselves into a real band, proving that the line between corporate product and genuine artistry could be blurred, and that even the most manufactured of stars could have a real, beating heart. While the Monkees were fighting for their artistic dignity, another American musical phenomenon was brewing, one that would prove you don't need a corporate boardroom to create a national scandal. All you need is a catchy beat and some really, really bad audio quality. In 1963, a garage band from Portland, Oregon called the Kingsmen went into a studio to cut a cover of Louie Louie, a simple, mid-tempo rock number about a sailor pining for his girl, originally written by Richard Berry in the 1950s. The session was rushed and cheap, costing a grand total of $50. To save money, the band recorded the song live in a single take, with singer Jack Ely standing on his tiptoes to reach a microphone suspended from the ceiling. The result was raw, energetic, and almost completely unintelligible. Ely's vocals, distorted by the distance and the cheap equipment, melted into a slurry of syllables over the band's famously primal three-chord stomp. What happened next was a perfect storm of teenage rebellion and parental paranoia. The song became a surprise hit, spreading like wildfire through teen dances and radio stations precisely because of its raw, almost feral energy. But that very murkiness became its curse. With the lyrics impossible to clearly decipher, teenagers began to play a game of telephone, whispering to each other that the song actually contained a string of graphic, obscene lyrics. A transcript of these supposed dirty words began to circulate, passed furtively on crumpled pieces of paper in school hallways across the country. For kids, this hidden meaning was part of the song's irresistible allure. It was their secret, a rebellious anthem right under the noses of the clueless adult world. For parents, however, it was a genuine cause for alarm. In an era still governed by strict conservative values, the idea that a pornographic rock song was being broadcast into their living rooms was terrifying. The situation escalated from concerned gossip to a full-blown national incident. Letters from outraged parents began flooding the offices of the Federal Communications Commission and even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, demanding that something be done about this musical menace. Incredibly, the FBI listened. In 1964, the agency's formidable resources were officially dedicated to a 2-year investigation, codenamed FBI File Number 62971, with the goal of determining if Louie Louie violated federal laws against the interstate transmission of obscene material. This wasn't a minor inquiry, it was a formal probe led by J. Edgar Hoover's G-Men. Agents obtained a copy of the 45 RPM single and subjected it to rigorous forensic analysis. They played the record at different speeds, 33, 45, and 78 revolutions per minute, listening intently for any trace of the rumored profanity. They even consulted audio technicians, hoping advanced technology could decode the muddled vocals. After 31 months of intensive scrutiny, the FBI's laboratory finally reached a definitive conclusion. In a memo dated February 6, 1966, the chief of the FBI lab reported his findings. The recording was, and we quote, unintelligible at any speed. The investigation was closed with no charges filed. The great Louie Louie scare was over, defeated not by censorship but by sheer, glorious incompetence. The whole affair stands as one of the most absurd chapters in the history of American pop culture, a testament to the power of misunderstanding. the government's futile attempt to uncover a secret message ended up creating the song's legendary status. It transformed a minor hit into a timeless rock and roll standard, a symbol of youthful fun and bureaucratic folly, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing in music isn't a hidden meaning, but a wild imagination and a really bad microphone. From the absurd spectacle of a federal investigation into a garbled rock and roll song, we travel to a far darker and more mysterious corner of American music, where a legend was born not from a misunderstanding, but from a whispered story of a supernatural pact. The tale of Robert Johnson is the original American music myth, a story so potent and haunting that it has overshadowed the few known facts of his brief life. As the story goes, the young, untalented Johnson was desperate to become a great bluesman. He was instructed to take his guitar to a remote crossroads in the Mississippi Delta, typically at midnight. There he was met by a large, imposing figure, the devil himself. Johnson handed over his guitar, the devil tuned it, played a few songs, and then returned it, conferring upon Johnson otherworldly skill in exchange for his eternal soul. When Johnson returned to his peers, his transformation was staggering. He could now play with a technique and emotional depth that seemed impossible, his fingers flying across the strings with a preternatural ability that left other musicians in awe. The historical reality of Robert Johnson is a ghostly silhouette compared to the towering legend. He was born in 1911 in Hazlehurst, Mississippi, and his life was as transient and hardscrabble as the music he would come to create. He traveled the Delta, playing on street corners, in juke joints, and at plantation parties. The facts surrounding his death at the age of 27 in 1938 are as murky as the Delta soil. The most widely accepted account is that he was poisoned by a jealous husband after flirting with the man's wife at a juke joint near Greenwood. He suffered for several days before succumbing, and his death certificate cryptically lists the cause of death as "no doctor." This tragic, sordid end would, decades later, take on a monumental significance. While other musicians had died young, Johnson's story, combined with his age, made him the foundational member of what would become known as the 27 Club, a tragic cultural phenomenon linking the untimely deaths of iconic musicians like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Kurt Cobain. Johnson was the prototype, the first to cement the idea of the brilliant artist burning out at the peak of their youth. For nearly 30 years after his death, Robert Johnson was little more than a footnote, known only to a handful of blues aficionados. His legacy consisted of just 29 songs recorded over 2 sessions in a San Antonio hotel room in 1936 and a Dallas warehouse in 1937. These recordings, however, were a time capsule of genius. When they were rediscovered and compiled onto an album called King of the Delta Blues Singers in 1961, they hit the burgeoning rock and roll scene like a thunderclap. Young British musicians hungry for authentic American roots music were spellbound. Eric Clapton famously said hearing Johnson was like hearing music for the first time, and the Rolling Stones quickly added his Love in Vain to their repertoire. Johnson's complex guitar patterns, his mournful, high-pitched voice, and the raw, desperate emotion in songs like Crossroad Blues, Hellhound on My Trail, and Me and the Devil Blues provided a direct primal connection to the very soul of the blues. The enduring power of the Crossroads myth speaks to a deep-seated cultural fascination with the price of genius. The Faustian bargain is a story we tell ourselves to explain the unexplainable. How could such profound talent emerge from such humble, desperate circumstances if not for some supernatural intervention? It connects to the romantic and often destructive idea of the tortured artist, whose brilliance is inseparable from their suffering. In Robert Johnson's case, the myth provided a framework for understanding his incredible leap in ability and his tragic early demise. It wasn't just that he died young, it was that the devil, as the story goes, had finally come to collect. This narrative gives his music an added layer of chilling authenticity, a sense that we are listening to something not entirely of this world, the sound of a man who truly had hellhounds on his trail. His story, a blend of scant fact and powerful folklore, remains the bedrock upon which so much of modern music's mythology is built, a haunting blues riff that continues to echo through the decades. Meanwhile, on the opposite coast from the FBI's sterile laboratories, a very different kind of experiment was taking place in the hazy, vibrant heart of San Francisco. The year was 1966, and the city's Haight-Ashbury district was the epicenter of a burgeoning counterculture, a place where boundaries were being dissolved both socially and chemically. It was in this chaotic, creative petri dish that one of the most persistent and terrifying urban legends of the era took root, the story of the LSD-spiked sugar cubes. The rumor spread like a psychic wildfire through the community, a whispered warning that a mysterious, anonymous dealer was distributing small, seemingly innocent sugar cubes that had been laced with potent, unmeasured doses of lysergic acid diethylamide. The terror of this legend lay in its randomness. You didn't have to seek out a psychedelic experience. It could seek you out, hidden in a cup of coffee, offered by a friendly-seeming stranger, or even just left out on a table at a party. This rumor found a perfect home in the early scene surrounding the Grateful Dead. Their shows, or acid tests, as they were famously called when organized by author Ken Kesey and his merry pranksters, were chaotic, all-night happenings where the line between performer and audience and between sober and tripping was intentionally blurred. The very atmosphere was charged with the possibility of an unplanned journey. In this environment, the sugar cube scare wasn't just a story, it was a palpable source of paranoia. You would hear shouts of "Don't drink the punch" echoing through the crowded, swirling rooms. This created a strange duality. On one hand, it fostered a new level of sonic experimentation. Bands like the Dead began playing long, improvisational jams that mimicked the unpredictable, flowing nature of an LSD trip, music that could comfortably soundtrack either a blissful peak or a sudden, terrifying spiral. The audience, whether intentionally dosed or just swept up in the collective energy, became an active participant in the sound, their reactions feeding back into the band's performance in a continuous psychedelic loop. But the dark side of this unregulated culture was very real. While the idea of a malicious cube fairy deliberately spiking random people's drinks was likely an exaggeration, accidental ingestions were commonplace. The substance was often distributed on sugar cubes because it was an easy way to measure and consume a liquid dose, and in the crowded, dimly lit chaos of a concert, it was tragically easy to pick up the wrong one. There were genuine health scares, individuals with underlying psychological conditions, or those simply unprepared for the intensity of the experience, could suffer severe psychotic breaks. The lack of any medical supervision or trip sitters at these early events meant that a bad reaction could escalate dangerously, with panicked friends having nowhere to turn. This wave of incidents did not go unnoticed by the authorities. The sugar cube scare, amplified by sensationalistic media reports, became a powerful justification for a crackdown. Police presence at concerts increased dramatically, and the once freewheeling atmosphere of the San Francisco scene began to tighten. The era of innocent, open experimentation was ending, forced underground by a combination of genuine danger and public panic. The legend of the spiked sugar cube, therefore, is more than just a bizarre anecdote. It's a perfect symbol of the 60s counterculture itself, a mixture of boundless idealism, reckless experimentation, and the inevitable, often harsh collision with reality. The world of manufactured pop would face its ultimate reckoning not in the 1960s, but 2 decades later, when the quest for a perfect image collided with technology in a scandal so profound it would shake the very foundations of the music industry. The story of Milli Vanilli begins not with 2 singers, but with a visionary, or perhaps villainous, German producer named Frank Farian. Farian had a proven track record of creating successful acts by pairing his own studio wizardry with attractive faces. In the late 1980s, he masterminded a new project, recording an album of slick dance pop tracks called Girl You Know It's True, using a team of talented but unseen session vocalists. The songs were catchy, polished, and ready for the charts, but Farian believed they needed a visual hook to become a global phenomenon. He found that hook in two charismatic young men, Rob Pilatus, a model and dancer with movie star looks, and Fabrice Morvan, a handsome aspiring singer. Farian's proposition was simple, and for the ambitious duo, irresistible. They would become the public faces of Milli Vanilli, lips syncing to the pre-recorded vocals in music videos and on stage, while reaping all the fame and fortune of international pop stardom. The plan worked with an efficiency that likely stunned even Farian. With their chiseled features, long dreadlocks, and infectious energy, Pilatus and Morvan were an instant sensation. The album, propelled by smash hits like the title track Girl You Know It's True, Blame It on the Rain, and Baby Don't Forget My Number, sold millions of copies worldwide. They won the hearts of teenagers everywhere, scored a #1 single, and in 1990 achieved the highest honor in American music, a Grammy Award for Best New Artist. They were at the absolute pinnacle of the pop world, but the pressure of maintaining the elaborate deception was immense. Behind the glamorous facade, Rob and Fab were living a lie, and the strain was beginning to show. They had started to push back against Farian, expressing a desire to sing on their next album and prove they had real talent. This tension set the stage for a catastrophic unmasking. The House of Cards finally crumbled during a live performance at the Lake Compounce Amusement Park in Bristol, Connecticut, on July 21, 1990. As the duo mimed their way through their hit Girl You Know It's True, the unforgiving nature of technology intervened. The backing tape containing the vocals began to skip, stuck in a robotic loop on the phrase, Girl, You Know It's Girl, You Know It's Girl, You Know It's. Rob Pilatus, microphone in hand, froze. He then fled the stage in humiliation, leaving a bewildered Fab Morvan to try and salvage the situation. The audience, initially confused, quickly turned to jeers. The incident was a public relations disaster, but it was merely the crack that caused the entire dam to break. The relentless media scrutiny that followed forced Frank Farian's hand. Just a few months later, in November 1990, he held a stunning press conference where he admitted the truth. Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan had not sung a single note on the multi-platinum album that bore their name. The fallout was swift, severe, and unprecedented. The revelation that the Grammy-winning Best New Artists were complete vocal frauds felt like a betrayal on a national scale. Almost overnight, the music that had been ubiquitous on radio stations vanished. Arista Records, their label, was forced to delete the album from its catalog and offer refunds to millions of furious fans. But the most symbolic blow came from the Recording Academy, which took the extraordinary step of stripping Milli Vanilli of their Grammy Award, an action that has never been repeated since. The duo became the punchline of 1,000 jokes, pariahs in an industry that had so recently celebrated them. The personal consequences were even more devastating. While Fab Morvan eventually embarked on a solo career, attempting to rebuild his reputation with his own voice, Rob Pilatus spiraled into a deep depression, struggling with substance abuse and numerous legal problems. The shame and public ridicule proved too much to bear. In April 1998, at the age of 33, he was found dead in a German hotel room from an accidental overdose of alcohol and prescription pills. The Milli Vanilli scandal became more than just a story about fake singers. It transformed into a cautionary tale about the destructive power of fame and the music industry's willingness to prioritize a marketable image over authentic artistry, a lesson whose echoes can still be heard in today's pop landscape. While the Milli Vanilli scandal exposed the dangers of prioritizing image over authenticity in pop music, another revolution was brewing that questioned the very definition of a musical instrument itself. In a small, cluttered workshop in Trumansburg, New York, a young physicist and engineer named Robert Moog was tinkering with a radical new idea. Throughout the 1950s and early 60s, he developed the first commercially available voltage-controlled modular synthesizer, a bewildering contraption of patch cables, knobs, and oscillators that looked more like a telephone switchboard than a piano. It was an instrument with no voice of its own, capable of generating an infinite palette of sounds from otherworldly bleeps and bloops to lush, sweeping textures that no violin or guitar could ever produce. But to the established music world of the mid-1960s, the Moog synthesizer was little more than a novelty, a scientific curiosity with no place in serious composition. Critics dismissed its sounds as cold, sterile, and artificial, the antithesis of the warm, human touch they believed was essential to real music. The turning point arrived not from a rock star, but from a brilliant and meticulous composer named Wendy Carlos. A trained classical musician and electronic music pioneer, Carlos saw the Moog not as a gimmick, but as a new kind of orchestra. She embarked on an ambitious project that seemed, to many, utterly perverse: to record an entire album of the works of Johann Sebastian Bach using nothing but the Moog synthesizer. The technical challenges were immense. This was before the days of polyphonic synthesizers or presets. Each individual note had to be painstakingly recorded onto a separate track of a multitrack tape recorder. A single, complex Bach fugue could require hundreds of passes, with Carlos adjusting knobs by fractions of a millimeter to ensure perfect pitch and tone for every single voice. It was a labor of love that took over a year to complete, a feat of near-obsessive precision. When Switched On Bach was released in 1968, it defied every expectation. Instead of sounding cold and robotic, the album was a revelation. Carlos had managed to coax astonishing warmth, clarity, and even playfulness from the machine. The complex counterpoint of Bach's music was presented with a crystalline purity that allowed listeners to hear each individual melodic line with new clarity. The public, far from being alienated, was captivated. The album became a runaway pop culture sensation, climbing the classical charts and astonishingly cracking the top 10 on the Billboard Pop Album chart. It went on to sell over 1 million copies and, in a final seal of mainstream approval, won 3 Grammy Awards in 1970. This was the moment the floodgates opened. Switched On Bach had done the impossible. It made the avant-garde accessible, demonstrating that electronic music could be both intellectually sophisticated and immensely enjoyable. Almost overnight, the Moog synthesizer was catapulted from the fringe into the spotlight. Rock musicians, always eager for new textures, were among the first to embrace it. The Beatles used a Moog on their album Abbey Road, most notably on the psychedelic swirls of Here Comes the Sun. Bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes built their entire sound around the instrument's capacity for grand, symphonic gestures, while German groups like Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk used it to construct entire futuristic landscapes of sound. The film industry also took notice. Stanley Kubrick, impressed by Switched On Bach, commissioned Wendy Carlos to create the haunting, entirely electronic score for his controversial film, A Clockwork Orange, a soundtrack that became as iconic as the movie itself. The synthesizer was no longer just a machine, it was a passport to uncharted sonic territories. Robert Moog's creation, born in a tiny upstate New York workshop, had fundamentally rewired the sound of popular music, proving that innovation could come from the most unexpected places, and that the future of music wasn't just in new songs, but in entirely new ways of making sound. Yet, even as the synthesizer was opening up new sonic frontiers, a bizarre and intricate myth was taking root in the very heart of the world's most famous band, proving that the most compelling stories aren't always found in the music itself, but in the spaces listeners choose to fill with their own imaginations. It all began in the autumn of 1969, when a college newspaper in Iowa published a letter from a reader claiming that Paul McCartney of the Beatles had been killed in a tragic car crash back in 1966 and secretly replaced by a winning double. To the rational mind, it was an outlandish premise, but in the supercharged psychedelic atmosphere following the release of the Abbey Road album, the idea caught fire, spreading like a virus through a fanbase already primed to look for hidden meanings in the band's increasingly complex work. This wasn't just a rumor, it became a full-scale, interactive scavenger hunt, with fans around the world scrutinizing every album cover, every lyric, and every note of music for evidence to support the theory. The clues they compiled formed a strangely compelling, if entirely coincidental, narrative. On the cover of SGT, Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Paul wears a patch on his sleeve that reads OPD, which theorists insisted stood for officially pronounced dead. In the collage inside the album, a hand is seen held above Paul's head, which was interpreted as a symbolic blessing for the deceased. The most famous piece of evidence came from the haunting fade out of Strawberry Fields Forever, where John Lennon's mumbled ad-libs were famously misheard as "I buried Paul." Lennon always insisted he was actually saying cranberry sauce, but the seed was planted. Then there was the bizarre sound collage, Revolution 9, on the White Album. When played backwards, a segment seemed to clearly state, "Turn me on, dead man," a phrase that sent chills down the spines of believers. The grand finale of this alleged trail of breadcrumbs was the cover of Abbey Road itself. Theorists decoded the image as a funeral procession. John, dressed in white, was the preacher. Ringo, in a black suit, was the undertaker. A barefoot Paul was the corpse, out of step with the others. And George, in denim, was the gravedigger. The Volkswagen Beetle parked on the street even had a license plate that read LMW 28 if, which was said to mean Linda McCartney weeps, and that Paul would have been 28 if he had lived. The reaction from the Beatles camp was initially one of bemused dismissal. They saw the hoax as a silly distraction, a game that had gotten out of hand. But their silence was misinterpreted as a tacit confirmation, and the story exploded into a global media circus. Radio stations dedicated entire programs to dissecting the clues. Newspapers ran front-page stories, and record stores couldn't keep Beatles albums in stock as fans rushed to conduct their own investigations. The frenzy reached such a pitch that Life magazine finally sent a reporter to track down the supposedly deceased bassist at his Scottish farm. The resulting article, featuring a very much alive Paul McCartney, was headlined, "Paul is still with us," but for the true believers, this was just part of the cover-up. The establishment media, they thought, was obviously in on the secret. This phenomenon was far more significant than just a quirky story about a rock band. The "Paul is dead" hoax was a landmark moment in pop culture, one of the first examples of fan-driven, interactive myth-making in the age of mass media. It was powered by the new technology of the LP record, which allowed for repeated, careful listening and the ability to manipulate playback speed and direction. More importantly, it revealed a deep-seated human desire to find patterns and narratives, especially in the face of something as unsettling as the impending breakup of the world's most beloved group. The Beatles had been a constant, joyful presence throughout the 60s. The idea that this unity was a lie, covering up a profound tragedy, was a story that somehow made more sense to some than the messy reality of artistic differences and personal friction. It was a collective work of fiction, a ghost story told about a living man, and it demonstrated that the relationship between an artist and their audience could be as complex and mysterious as the music itself. While the worlds of pop and psychedelia were dealing with their own controversies, an entirely different kind of rebellion was brewing in the grimy, decadent heart of New York City. In the early 1970s, the rock scene had become dominated by virtuosic, stadium-filling acts whose lengthy guitar solos and serious artistic pretensions felt increasingly distant from rock and roll's raw, rebellious roots. Into this void stomped the New York Dolls, a band that looked less like musicians and more like a gang of glamorous street urchins who had just looted a thrift store and their big sister's makeup bag. They were the glorious, mangy antithesis of everything rock had become. Their sound was a primitive, speeding freight train of Chuck Berry riffs filtered through the swagger of the Rolling Stones, but their true revolution was visual. They took the stage in platform heels so high they could barely walk, wearing smeared lipstick, feather boas, and leopard print pants so tight they seemed painted on. This wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a full-scale assault on masculinity and good taste, a bizarre and beautiful spectacle that made them instant icons and pariahs in equal measure. The mastermind trying to harness this glorious chaos was a savvy record executive named Marty Thau. He saw past the makeup and the mess to the band's undeniable charisma and the raw power of their music. Signing on as their co-manager, Thau's primary job became a near-impossible balancing act. He had to convince a skeptical, often hostile music industry that the Dolls were a serious commercial proposition, all while trying to prevent the band from imploding under the weight of their own hedonistic lifestyle. Thau secured them a lucrative record deal with Mercury Records, a testament to his belief in their potential, but from the start it was a fraught partnership. The label executives were horrified by the band's androgynous appearance and chaotic live shows, which were less concerts and more unpredictable, booze-soaked happenings. They pressured Thau to clean the Dolls up, to get them to dress more normally and play more tightly. It was a demand that fundamentally misunderstood the band's entire reason for existing. This tension between artistic integrity and commercial viability played out in their association with Andy Warhol's famed factory scene. The Dolls were natural inhabitants of Warhol's world, where art, celebrity, and decadence blurred into one. They shared a similar aesthetic of trashy glamour and a love for pushing boundaries. For a brief moment, it seemed like a perfect match. Warhol even considered managing the band and designing their album covers, but the partnership never fully materialized, partly because the Dolls' own self-destructive tendencies were already beginning to take a toll. Their two albums for Mercury, 1973's New York Dolls and 1974's Too Much Too Soon, were critical favorites but commercial disasters. Radio stations refused to play them, and mainstream audiences were simply baffled. The band's look, which they saw as liberating and fun, was widely misinterpreted. In an era still reeling from the straightforward machismo of rock gods, 5 scrawny guys from New York in heels and makeup were often dismissed as a simple joke, a novelty act that was too weird to ever catch on. Their commercial failure, however, masked a seismic influence that would ripple through the next decade of music. The New York Dolls were the crucial missing link between the rock and roll of the past and the punk revolution that was just around the corner. They proved that you didn't need technical mastery to have immense power. All you needed was attitude, energy, and 3 chords played with ferocious conviction. Bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash would directly cite the Dolls as a primary inspiration, borrowing their raw sound and their confrontational stance toward the establishment. Simultaneously, their flamboyant style and love of big hair and makeup became the direct blueprint for the glam metal explosion of the 1980s. Bands like Mötley Crüe and Poison took the Dolls' theatricality, sanitized it for a mass audience, and sold it to millions, becoming superstars by following a path the Dolls themselves had blazed but could never successfully walk to its end. The New York Dolls story is the ultimate testament to the idea that success in music isn't always measured in record sales. Sometimes the most important artists are those who crash and burn spectacularly, providing the sparks that ignite the fires for everyone who comes after. But while the New York Dolls were burning out in a blaze of glamorous defiance, a very different kind of flame was being extinguished across the Atlantic, one that signaled not a rejection of the psychedelic era, but one of its most profound personal casualties. If the story of Pink Floyd began as a joyous explosion of color and sound, its heart was a brilliant, fragile young artist named Syd Barrett. As the band's founding singer, guitarist, and primary songwriter, Barrett was the undisputed creative force behind their early success. He possessed a unique, whimsical genius, crafting surreal, childlike songs like See Emily Play and Bike that perfectly captured the innocent, kaleidoscopic spirit of London's burgeoning psychedelic scene in 1966. Pink Floyd became the house band for the famed UFO Club, where their extended, improvisational soundscapes provided the perfect soundtrack for a generation exploring altered states of consciousness. For a brief, shining moment, Syd Barrett was the Pied Piper of this new world. The tool for this exploration, however, would become the agent of his undoing. Barrett, like many of his contemporaries, began regularly and heavily experimenting with LSD, but where some found creative expansion, Barrett's mind seemed to fracture under the strain. The change was gradual at first, then alarmingly rapid. Bandmates and friends watched as the witty, charismatic young man began to retreat into a hollowed-out shell of himself. His eyes, once sparkling with mischief, would take on a vacant, thousand-yard stare. During interviews, he would often fall completely silent, offering no response to questions for minutes on end. The most disturbing transformations happened on stage. There were nights where Barrett would simply stand motionless, his guitar hanging from his neck, refusing to play a single note. On other occasions, he would detune all his strings during a performance, creating a wall of dissonant noise that baffled audiences and horrified his bandmates. At one particularly infamous show, he settled on a single chord and proceeded to strum it relentlessly for the entire duration of the song, a monotonous, droning sound that was less a musical performance and more a cry for help from a mind coming unglued. The band found themselves in an impossible position. They were riding a wave of success built on Barrett's songs, but the person who wrote those songs was visibly disintegrating before their eyes. Trying to manage the situation, they made a desperate and, in hindsight, deeply misguided decision. They brought in one of Syd's old art school friends, guitarist David Gilmour, under the initial premise that Gilmour would simply play the parts live that Barrett could no longer handle, allowing Syd to remain the creative center. The plan was a catastrophic failure. Barrett's condition only worsened, and his presence in the studio became a source of immense tension and sadness. He would show up with a blank expression, unable to contribute meaningfully. The final, heartbreaking solution was one of quiet abandonment. In early 1968, on the way to a gig, the remaining members of Pink Floyd simply made a collective, unspoken decision. They did not stop to pick Syd up. They drove on without him, and he was never asked to play with the band again. He was, in the most passive and painful way possible, fired from his own creation. What followed was one of the most bizarre and brief solo careers in rock history. Under pressure from the record label, Barrett recorded 2 solo albums, The Madcap Laughs and Barrett. The sessions were chaotic and emotionally fraught, with producers including Gilmour and bassist Roger Waters patiently trying to coax coherent performances from him. The resulting music is a haunting document of a fractured psyche. The songs are often beautiful, filled with flashes of his old lyrical brilliance, but they are also starkly uneven, with sudden tempo changes, jarringly out-of-tune guitar playing, and a palpable sense of loneliness and confusion. After these albums failed to find a commercial audience, Syd Barrett did something almost unprecedented for a rock star. He completely vanished. He returned to his mother's house in Cambridge, withdrew all his money from the bank, and spent the rest of his life as a virtual recluse, painting and gardening, entirely removed from the world of music he had once helped to shape. His absence, however, cast a long and haunting shadow over Pink Floyd's subsequent mega-stardom. The band, particularly Roger Waters, was profoundly haunted by the loss of their friend. Barrett became the ghost in the machine, the silent specter of creativity corrupted. Their monumental 1975 album, Wish You Were Here, is essentially a sprawling, heartfelt elegy to him. The epic track Shine On You Crazy Diamond is a direct and poignant tribute. Its famous opening notes a musical representation of the spark of genius they watched fade away. The title track, Wish You Were Here, is a lament for a lost connection. The most chilling moment came during the album's recording, as the band was listening to a playback of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. A heavy-set, bald man with shaved eyebrows wandered into the studio. He watched them silently for a long time before anyone realized it was Syd Barrett himself, his appearance so altered by weight gain and his life of seclusion that his former bandmates didn't recognize him. He had arrived on a day dedicated to an album about his own disappearance, a coincidence so painfully poetic it felt like something from one of his own songs. His brief, silent visit served as the final, heartbreaking confirmation of the tragedy they had been wrestling with for years, a reminder that the cost of the psychedelic dream for some was a silence that would last a lifetime. If the wild, unpredictable energy of early rock and roll felt like it was bubbling up from the streets, there was a powerful, invisible hand guiding which of those sounds actually made it to the public's ears. That hand belonged to the disc jockey, the kingmaker of the airwaves, and for decades, the secret grease that kept the machine running was a practice known as payola, a portmanteau of pay and Victrola, the iconic record player. In its simplest form, payola was an under-the-table payment from a record label to a radio DJ in exchange for playing a specific song. It was the music industry's original sin, a shadow economy that determined which artists became stars and which records faded into obscurity. And when the curtain was finally pulled back, it ignited a scandal that nearly destroyed rock and roll itself. The man who came to symbolize the first great payola scandal was none other than Alan Freed, the disc jockey who famously coined the term rock and roll. In the early 1950s, Freed's radio show on Winds in New York was a national sensation, a wild, pounding portal into the exciting new world of rhythm and blues music he helped repackage for a white teenage audience. His influence was immense. A single spin from Freed could send a record sales soaring, but this immense power made him a target. In 1959, as part of a broader congressional investigation into corrupt business practices in the broadcasting industry, the spotlight turned to radio. The hearings, led by Congressman Orrin Harris, aimed to expose the rampant bribery that was distorting the charts. Witnesses testified about elaborate schemes, cash-filled envelopes, lavish gifts, and even songwriting credits given to DJs for records they had no hand in creating, a clever way to funnel ongoing royalties their way. Alan Freed was summoned to testify. He arrived not as a contrite figure, but as a defiant one. He admitted that he had accepted payments, but he argued a crucial distinction. He claimed he only played songs he genuinely believed his audience would like. For Freed, this wasn't bribery, it was a standard industry practice, a form of promotion. The committee, however, saw it as outright corruption. They presented him with a statement to sign, one that would have him deny he had ever accepted payola. Freed refused. His refusal was less about admitting guilt and more about a principled, if flawed, stand against what he saw as a hypocritical witch hunt. The consequences were swift and severe. Winds fired him. He was charged with commercial bribery, and though he eventually pleaded guilty to some charges, his career was irrevocably shattered. He died just a few years later, in 1965, from alcoholism-related illnesses, a broken man who became the sacrificial lamb for an entire industry's sins. The immediate result of the scandal was the amendment of the Communications Act to make payola a criminal offense, punishable by steep fines and even prison time. The Federal Communications Commission also required radio stations to keep detailed logs of everything they played to ensure transparency. On the surface, it seemed the problem had been solved. But the music industry, fueled by enormous profits, simply found new, more sophisticated ways to game the system. the practice didn't disappear, it just went underground and got a legal makeover. By the 1980s, a new, massive payola scandal was brewing, one that implicated the industry's biggest players. This time, the investigations, led by the FCC and a young prosecutor named Rudolph Giuliani, uncovered a complex web of independent promoters. These promoters acted as middlemen, taking large fees from major record labels and then funneling that money to radio stations in the form of consulting fees or promotional budgets, which were then used to guarantee airplay for specific songs. It was payola by another name, but with a layer of plausible deniability. The 1980s investigations led to massive settlements. CBS Records, for instance, paid a settlement to avoid prosecution, and numerous radio stations were fined. The congressional hearings that followed were a media spectacle, but they ultimately failed to stop the practice for good. The lasting impact of these cyclical scandals was the creation of a permanent, shadowy infrastructure for music promotion. The system evolved from crude cash bribes to a sophisticated and often legal ecosystem of independent promotion, where relationships and financial incentives still largely dictate what gets played on commercial radio. This fundamentally changed the way music was marketed, creating a high-stakes financial barrier that made it nearly impossible for independent artists without major label backing to break into the mainstream. The spirit of payola, the idea that airtime could be bought, survived every attempt to kill it, proving that in the business of music, the connection between money and popularity has always been a lot more complicated than the charts would have you believe. While the saga of payola revealed the dark financial machinery behind the charts, the music that did break through often carried its own hidden weight, none more so than one of the most iconic songs ever recorded. For decades, Hotel California by the Eagles has been a staple of classic rock radio, its haunting melody and enigmatic lyrics inviting endless interpretation. Is it about a haunted hotel, a metaphor for drug addiction? The band themselves remained famously tight-lipped, allowing the mystery to fuel the song's legend. But in a bizarre turn of events that could only happen in the modern age, the true meaning of the song was not revealed in a documentary or a memoir, but in a crowded New York City courtroom during a criminal trial over stolen goods. The case, which unfolded in 2020, involved a set of handwritten draft lyrics for the song, and it forced Don Henley to finally, and under oath, explain what the band had been hinting at for over 40 years. Henley testified that Hotel California was always intended as a scathing critique of the American dream, or more precisely, the nightmare that the pursuit of that dream could become. He described it as a song about the dark underbelly of the American dream and the pursuit of excess. This wasn't just a song about a spooky place. It was a portrait of the spiritual emptiness and narcissism that he saw consuming the California lifestyle, and by extension, the entire nation in the mid-1970s. The hotel itself was a symbol for this gilded trap, a luxurious prison of hedonism that you could check into anytime you liked, but from which you could never truly leave. The famous line, "You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave," was about the psychological and spiritual cost of that lifestyle, the permanent scars left by a life devoted to pleasure and fame. This courtroom revelation gave the classic song a new, profound gravity, framing it not as a ghost story, but as a deeply philosophical and cynical commentary on the era that created it. The reason these profound artistic statements were being made in a legal setting was stranger than any lyric. The case centered around a cache of over 100 pages of handwritten notes and lyrics, known as the Hotel California lyric pads. These were not just photocopies, they were the original, fragile pages where Don Henley and Glenn Friesen had painstakingly worked out the words to not only Hotel California, but also other classics like Life in the Fast Lane. For decades, these pads were stored securely at an author's house in the small town of Liberty, New York, where Henley had sent them in the 1970s to be used as research material for a planned biography of the band that was never completed. Somehow, these priceless artifacts of American music history went missing from that author's possession and ended up in the hands of rare book dealers. The scheme to profit from them was intricate. A group of individuals, including a well-known memorabilia expert named Glenn Horowitz, acquired the documents. They then allegedly sold them to Edward Kosinski, the owner of a rare books business, and Craig Inside, a curator at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. These men then began listing individual pages for sale online, with price tags reaching up to $20,000 per page. The situation exploded into the open when Don Henley, alerted to the sales, discovered the pages were his stolen property. Instead of simply demanding their return, he went to the authorities, triggering a criminal investigation. The resulting trial saw the memorabilia dealers facing charges of criminal possession of stolen property, turning a dispute over collectibles into a high-stakes legal battle with potential prison time. The trial peeled back the curtain on the shadowy, big-money world of music memorabilia collecting, a market where the line between passionate preservation and grave robbing can become dangerously thin. The defense argued a fascinating, if cynical, point. They claimed that Henley had essentially abandoned the papers, and that by taking them and putting them up for sale, they were actually preserving a piece of cultural heritage. It was an argument that framed the thieves as curators and the artist as negligent. The prosecution and Henley himself saw it as straightforward theft. For Henley, these were not mere commodities. They were the intimate, vulnerable first drafts of his life's work, the unvarnished evidence of the creative process. The courtroom became a bizarre arena where the value of art was debated not in terms of its cultural impact, but its price per page on the open market. The case ultimately resulted in mixed verdicts, with some charges being dropped and a mistrial declared on others, but its real impact was the spotlight it shone on this strange intersection. It revealed a world where the genesis of a song about the corrupting influence of materialism had itself become a trophy in the very pursuit of wealth and possession it was written to critique, completing a perfect and deeply ironic circle. While the world of mega-selling rock bands was grappling with stolen lyrics and courtroom dramas, an entirely different kind of musical combustion was igniting in the gritty, underground clubs where the stakes were lower but the passions burned just as bright. For the horror punk pioneers, the Misfits, the end was not a quiet fade-out but a spectacular, gasoline-soaked explosion that perfectly matched the band's over-the-top, B-movie aesthetic. The tension that led to that final, fiery Halloween night in 1983 had been simmering for years, a classic clash of artistic vision versus brute force dedication. On one side was the band's founder, the notoriously volatile and fiercely controlling singer Glenn Danzig. He was the creative engine, the architect of the Misfits' unique sound, a lightning-fast fusion of 50s rockabilly and metallic punk, all wrapped in lyrics celebrating skulls, zombies, and sci-fi schlock. On the other side was bassist Jerry Only, the band's pragmatic workhorse who, along with his intimidatingly muscular brother Doyle on guitar, provided the relentless, pounding rhythm that drove the music. The conflict was fundamental. Danzig saw the Misfits as his personal project, his artistic statement. He handled the business, the imagery, and the songwriting with an iron will. Jerry Only, however, felt that the band's success was built on the collective, back-breaking effort of the entire group, particularly the relentless touring and the DIY ethic of hand-screening their own iconic skull logo t-shirts, which were becoming a crucial source of income. Danzig's refusal to share publishing rights for the songs he wrote was a particularly bitter point of contention. As the band's cult following grew, so did the resentment, turning the tour van into a pressure cooker of clashing egos. By the time they arrived in Detroit for their Halloween show at the Greystone Hall, the Misfits were a band held together by little more than habit and the adhesive power of their own signature hair grease. The night of October 31st, 1983, was destined for disaster from the start. The venue was overcrowded and boiling hot, filled with a rowdy Michigan punk crowd known for its intensity. Almost immediately, technical problems plagued the set. Microphones cut out, amplifiers hummed with feedback, and the sound was a muddy, distorted mess. The hostile audience, fueled by the chaotic energy and perhaps sensing the band's internal fracture, turned on them. Beer cans and insults were hurled at the stage. In the middle of the turmoil, a fan allegedly climbed onto the stage and spat on Glenn Danzig. For a frontman with a legendary temper, this was the final straw. Danzig's response was swift and violent. He reportedly attacked the fan, a physical confrontation that sent shockwaves through the already volatile room. The show, already teetering on the edge of complete collapse, was now spinning into anarchy. Returning to the microphone after the scuffle, a seething Danzig had reached his breaking point. He glared out at the crowd and then back at his bandmates. Instead of launching into the next song, he made an announcement that would become punk rock legend. He simply said he was done, that this was it, and then he walked off the stage, effectively quitting the band in the middle of their own concert. In that moment, the Misfits were dead. But the finale was yet to come. With Danzig gone and the crowd in an uproar, Jerry Only and his brother Doyle were left standing on stage in the wreckage. In a gesture of pure nihilistic theater, Doyle Wolfgang von Frankenstein, perhaps as a tribute, perhaps as an act of pure frustration, or perhaps just because it seemed like the only logical thing left to do, proceeded to pour lighter fluid on his electric guitar and set it ablaze. The image of the hulking guitarist holding a flaming instrument against the backdrop of a dissolving band was a perfect apocalyptic ending, a real-life horror show that surpassed any of the fictional ones they sang about. That fiery destruction, however, was not the end of the story. In fact, it was the birth of the Misfits' most powerful myth. The band's catalog, which had only found a limited audience during their initial run, began to spread through the underground tape trading network of the 80s and 90s. The story of their explosive breakup, a perfect blend of violence, drama, and pyrotechnics, became an essential part of their appeal. They were no longer just a band, they were a legend of punk rock self-destruction. This growing cult status eventually proved too powerful to resist. In the mid-90s, more than a decade after the Greystone Hall Inferno, Jerry Only resurrected the Misfits name, recruiting a new singer to front the band. This move sparked a bitter, decades-long legal war with Glenn Danzig over the rights to the band's name, imagery, and music, a conflict that mirrored their original personal clashes. The reunions, first with singer Michael Graves and later with a rotating cast of vocalists, have been commercially successful, introducing the Misfits' music to new generations. Yet for many purists, the true Misfits died on that Halloween night in Detroit. The band's story stands as a quintessential punk rock parable. Sometimes an ugly, chaotic, and violent end is the best possible fuel for an enduring legacy, proving that in the world of music, how you burn out can be just as important as how you shine. While the Misfits were carving out a legacy of genuine horror and chaos, another corner of American music was embracing the spooky and the strange with a much lighter, more playful spirit, creating a Halloween anthem that would prove far more lasting than any punk rock explosion. The story of The Monster Mash begins not with a musician but with an aspiring actor named Bobby Pickett, who found himself stuck between two worlds. He was performing as the lead singer of a band called The Cordials, grinding out covers on the club circuit, but his true passion was for the dramatic, horror-filled performances of actors like Boris Karloff. One night, while his band was playing the doo-wop hit Little Darlin', Pickett decided to inject a little theatrical fun into the routine. Instead of singing the song straight, he delivered the spoken-word bridge in a perfect, gravelly impersonation of Karloff's iconic monster voice. To his surprise, the crowd went wild. It was this unexpected reaction that planted the seed for a truly bizarre idea. What if someone wrote a novelty song entirely from the perspective of a classic movie monster? Teaming up with his bandmate Leonard Capizzi, Pickett set out to create a dance craze for the undead. The concept was simple but brilliant. A mad scientist named Igor in the lyrics has brought a monster to life in his lab, and this creature, the narrator of the song, introduces a new dance sensation that sweeps through the graveyard. The sound was a direct parody of the dance crazes that were dominating the charts in the early 1960s, like the mashed potato, but filtered through a Universal Studios horror lens. When they felt they had a solid demo, Pickett and Capizzi took it to every major record label in Los Angeles, only to be met with a chorus of rejection. Executives simply didn't get it. They saw it as a silly, one-note joke with no commercial potential, a song too specifically tied to a holiday to have any lasting appeal. It seemed like the Monster Mash was doomed to remain a buried secret. Refusing to give up, the pair scraped together enough money to rent a studio for a single 3-hour session. They hired a group of session musicians who were listed on the original single as the Crypt Kickers. Unbeknownst to nearly everyone involved, the pianist for that session was a young Leon Russell, long before he became a legendary figure in his own right. The recording was a masterpiece of low-budget ingenuity. To create the iconic sound of a coffin lid creaking open, someone in the studio found a loose nail and pulled it slowly out of a piece of wood right next to the microphone. The sound of a bubbling cauldron was made by blowing through a straw into a cup of water. These homemade sound effects, combined with Pickett's wonderfully cheesy Karloff impression and the song's irresistibly catchy melody, created a strange kind of magic. They pressed a few hundred copies on their own tiny label, Garpax, and convinced a local DJ to give it a spin as a Halloween gag. The public's reaction was the exact opposite of the music executives' predictions. The song was an instant novelty. It started spreading from city to city, not as a serious hit, but as a fun, seasonal oddity that radio listeners demanded. Against all odds, the Monster Mash climbed the charts, eventually reaching the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 in October of 1962, just weeks before the Cuban Missile Crisis plunged the world into a very real fear. In a time of profound anxiety, the song's goofy, harmless fun provided a welcome escape. Its initial success was surprising, but its true legacy is its astonishing longevity. Like a zombie that refuses to stay dead, the Monster Mash has re-entered the pop culture charts several times, enjoying resurgences in 1970 and again in 1973, making it one of the very few songs to hit the top 100 in 3 separate decades. What the record labels failed to understand was that the Monster Mash wasn't just a novelty song, it was a perfect piece of cultural DNA. It tapped into a universal, nostalgic love for the classic Hollywood monsters, creatures who were more friendly than frightening. It was safe scares for kids, a gateway into the world of horror that parents could enjoy alongside them. Its enduring charm lies in its sheer lack of pretense. It never tries to be anything more than a 3-minute bit of fun, and in its cheerful, unassuming way, it has cemented itself as the undisputed, perennial soundtrack to Halloween. Every October, without any need for promotion, it emerges from the crypt to soundtrack parties, classroom celebrations, and supermarket aisles, a testament to the power of a simple, well-executed idea. Bobby Pickett's silly Boris Karloff impression, born on a small club stage, ultimately created a shared cultural touchstone that has outlasted countless more serious works of art, proving that sometimes the Monster Mash is all that really matters. And while the Monster Mash was offering a playful take on the world of shadows, the real world of soul music was about to be struck by a tragedy that was anything but funny, a death so sudden and strange it would forever haunt the genre. To understand the shock of Sam Cooke's death, you first have to appreciate the sheer magnitude of his life. He wasn't just a singer, he was a trailblazer. He began his career as the golden-voiced lead of the legendary gospel group The Soul Stirrers, where his smooth, angelic tenor made him a superstar within the black church community. But Cook had a grander vision. In 1957, he made the daring and to some scandalous leap into secular pop music. This was a huge risk. Gospel purists saw it as a betrayal, and the pop world was still heavily segregated. But Cook's genius was his ability to translate the raw emotion of gospel into songs of teenage love and heartbreak, creating a new sound that would soon be called soul. With a string of immaculate hits like You Send Me, Wonderful World, and Twistin' the Night Away, he didn't just cross over. He built a bridge, becoming one of the first black artists to achieve massive, mainstream success on his own terms, while also founding his own record label and publishing company to maintain control of his music, a radical act of independence at the time. By December of 1964, Sam Cooke was at the absolute peak of his powers. He was only 33 years old, a handsome, charismatic star with the world at his feet. He had just recorded what many consider his masterpiece, A Change Is Gonna Come, a profound and politically charged anthem that reflected his growing involvement in the civil rights movement. The song was a staggering artistic leap, a world away from his earlier pop hits, and it signaled a new, more serious chapter in his career. On the night of December 11th, after a long day of recording in Los Angeles, Cooke went out for drinks with a friend. Later, he met a 22-year-old woman named Elissa Boyer at a restaurant and drove her to a motel on South Figueroa Street called the Hacienda Motel, a place known for renting rooms by the hour. According to the official police report, this is where the night spiraled into chaos. The story told by Boyer and the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin, was that Cooke had checked them into a room where Boyer claimed he then attacked her. She said she managed to escape with most of her clothes, but Cooke had taken her dress. She ran to the motel manager's office for help. Moments later, a furious and partially undressed Cooke burst into the office, reportedly demanding to know where the girl was. A violent confrontation ensued. Bertha Franklin, a 55-year-old woman, stated that the much larger, younger Cooke charged at her. Fearing for her life, she grabbed a .22 caliber pistol and fired 3 times. One bullet struck Cooke in the heart, killing him almost instantly. Police arrived to find Cooke dead on the office floor, wearing only a sports coat and 1 shoe. The official ruling was justifiable homicide. On the surface, it was a sordid tale of a celebrity's life ending in a seedy incident, a narrative that many were all too willing to accept. But for those who knew Sam Cooke, the official story was riddled with unsettling inconsistencies that pointed to something far more sinister. Why would a man of Cooke's wealth and status, who owned a beautiful home in Los Angeles, take a date to a cheap, notorious motel? The manager, Bertha Franklin, had no visible injuries, while Cooke's body was badly beaten, with severe wounds to his head and face that seemed inconsistent with a simple fall after being shot. The woman, Elissa Boyer, had a history of arrests for prostitution, leading to theories that the entire encounter may have been a setup for a robbery that escalated fatally. Most chillingly, Cooke's family and friends insisted that the man described in the police report, a violent, out-of-control predator, was nothing like the disciplined, ambitious businessman they knew. They pointed to Cooke's recent moves in the music industry. His assertive stance on artists' rights and his growing political activism had made him powerful enemies. Was his death not a random act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated hit designed to look like a seedy crime, silencing a rising voice for black empowerment? The truth of that night died with Sam Cooke. The police investigation was swift and many argue superficial, quick to close the case without pursuing these troubling questions. His funeral was a massive, emotional event, but the shadow of his death lingered, casting a pall over the soul music he helped create. A Change Is Gonna Come was released posthumously and became an instant and enduring anthem for the civil rights movement, its hopeful lyrics tinged with an unbearable sadness. Sam Cooke's legacy is therefore a double helix of brilliant achievement and profound mystery. He left behind a blueprint for Black artistic and entrepreneurial success that would inspire generations from Aretha Franklin to Beyoncé. Yet his story remains a painful reminder that genius offers no protection against tragedy, and that sometimes the most beautiful songs are followed by a silence filled with unanswerable questions. It was a sweltering July evening in Chicago, a night meant for baseball, beer, and a bit of raucous promotional fun. But the event scheduled for July 12, 1979 at Comiskey Park would metastasize into something far darker, a cultural flashpoint that laid bare the festering tensions within American music and society. The Chicago White Sox were struggling both on the field and at the ticket office. To boost attendance for a doubleheader against the Detroit Tigers, the team's promotions director, Mike Veeck, son of the legendary baseball showman Bill Veeck, hatched a plan with local shock jock Steve Dahl. Dahl had built his radio persona around the vehement "Disco Sucks" movement, a backlash that had been building for years. The concept was simple. Any fan who brought a disco record to the ballpark would be admitted for just 98 cents. Between the games, the collected vinyl would be gathered in a crate out in center field and blown to smithereens. What Veeck and Dahl envisioned as a cathartic, if destructive, stunt tapped into a deep and ugly vein of resentment. By the late 1970s, disco had become the undisputed king of popular music, dominating the airwaves and the charts. But its success bred contempt, particularly among a faction of young, predominantly white male rock fans. The "disco sucks" rhetoric, while often framed as a critique of the music's perceived blandness or commercialism, was deeply entangled with homophobia and racism. Disco's roots were firmly planted in the Black, Latino, and gay underground club scenes of New York City. Its flamboyant fashion, its emphasis on dance-floor hedonism, and its celebration of a diverse, inclusive community represented a challenge to the more rigid guitar hero machismo of mainstream rock. For its detractors, disco wasn't just bad music, it was a threat to their cultural identity. The response to the promotion was overwhelming and alarming. Instead of the expected crowd of 20,000, over 50,000 people descended on Comiskey Park. The air was thick with a volatile, festival-like atmosphere, fueled by alcohol and a collective sense of grievance. Fans didn't just bring one record, many brought stacks of vinyl, clutching them like weapons. As the first game proceeded, the crowd grew increasingly restless, chanting "Disco sucks" and hurling records like frisbees onto the field. The explosion itself, when it came, was less a controlled demolition and more a symbolic detonation. As Steve Dahl, wearing an army helmet, triggered the blast, the crate erupted, sending shards of vinyl high into the air. But instead of satisfying the mob, the explosion was a starter's pistol. Thousands of fans, clutching firecrackers and more records, surged past the overwhelmed security forces and flooded onto the playing field. What followed was not a celebration but a full-scale riot. The manicured grass became a battlefield. Fans set small fires, tore up the sod, and battled with the few police officers who tried to restore order. The batting cage was dismantled, the bases were stolen as trophies, and the entire field was rendered unplayable. The White Sox players, fearing for their safety, locked themselves in their clubhouse. The Tigers' manager, Sparky Anderson, refused to let his team take the field for the second game, declaring it unsafe. After a prolonged delay, the umpires had no choice but to declare a forfeit in favor of Detroit. It was the first time in American League history that a team had to forfeit a game due to fan behavior. The image of a burning record crate on a baseball diamond became an indelible symbol of cultural civil war. In the immediate aftermath, Disco Demolition Night was often dismissed as an out-of-control prank, a bizarre sports anomaly, but its impact on the music industry was immediate and profound. Almost overnight, radio stations that had been exclusively playing disco began rapidly shifting their formats to rock, country, or adult contemporary. Record labels, sensing the seismic shift in public sentiment, cancelled disco contracts and dropped artists associated with the genre. The event had given a violent public permission slip for the mass rejection of disco. It wasn't that the music disappeared. It evolved into dance pop, hip-hop, and house music, but its era of unquestioned commercial dominance was abruptly over. The demolition was less the cause of disco's decline than its most spectacular funeral pyre, a grotesque public ritual that signaled the triumph of a new, more narrowly defined rock-centric mainstream. The event stands as a stark reminder of how easily musical taste can become a proxy for deeper social anxieties, and how a night of planned entertainment can curdle into an ugly manifestation of the fear of a changing America. In the landscape of American music, populated by rebels, rock gods, and soul legends, there exists a figure so utterly singular that he seems to have wandered in from another dimension entirely. Herbert Kayori, known to the world as Tiny Tim, was a walking anachronism, a man who seemed to be broadcasting directly from a bygone era of tinny phonographs and gaslit vaudeville stages. His act was deceptively simple. He would appear, a gangly, 6'1" man with long, stringy hair and a beaky nose clutching a ukulele. Then he would open his mouth and out would pour a startling, operatic falsetto, a voice he used to sing sentimental standards from the 1910s and 20s, songs like Tiptoe Through the Tulips with Me and Living in the Sunlight, Loving in the Moonlight. In an age of psychedelic rock and burgeoning social protest, Tiny Tim was a living ghost, a bizarre and fascinating cul-de-sac in the history of popular culture. His rise to national prominence was as unlikely as his appearance. For years, he had been a fixture of New York's Greenwich Village freak show scene, performing his peculiar act in dingy clubs alongside drag queens and beat poets, a curiosity appreciated by a small, niche audience. That all changed in a single night in 1968 when he made his debut on the smash hit television show, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. The contrast was jarring. Surrounded by the show's rapid-fire, mod-era comedy and psychedelic visuals, Tiny Tim shuffled onto the stage, offered a meek "God bless you," and launched into his high-pitched serenade. The audience wasn't sure whether to laugh or stare in bewildered silence, but something about his complete, unironic commitment to the performance, his strange innocence in a cynical time, captured the nation's imagination. He became an instant, if baffling, star. The zenith of this fame was an event that has never been replicated: his wedding. In December of 1969, Tiny Tim married his 17-year-old fiancée, Miss Victoria Budinger, known to the public as Miss Vicky, live on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. It was a full-blown, televised spectacle, a media circus of unparalleled weirdness. An estimated 40 million people tuned in, making it one of the most watched television events of its time. The ceremony was a surreal mix of showbiz glitz and Tiny Tim's own peculiarities. He serenaded his bride with "I'm so glad we're living in the moonlight," and after exchanging vows, the couple cut a towering, heart-shaped wedding cake. For a moment, Tiny Tim was not a novelty act. He was the center of the American universe, a testament to the power of television to create and celebrate the profoundly unusual. Yet behind this public persona lay a man of profound and often contradictory habits. Offstage, Tiny Tim was a devoutly religious and deeply eccentric individual. He was a strict fundamentalist Christian who avoided alcohol, drugs, and profanity, and he was a voracious student of history, particularly the early days of American popular music. He lived an almost monk-like existence, often staying in hotels where he would meticulously wash his own laundry in the sink and maintain a bizarre Spartan diet. He claimed to be a virgin until his wedding night, a story that fed into his image of childlike purity. This created a strange duality: the public saw a bizarre clown, but the private man saw himself as a serious preserver of a forgotten musical tradition, a missionary for the songs of Nick Lucas and Ruddy Valet. His career, as one might expect, could not sustain that level of surreal fame. The novelty eventually wore thin, and the television offers dwindled. For the next 3 decades, Tiny Tim persisted, inhabiting a strange, persistent corner of the entertainment world. He never stopped performing, traversing the country for bookings at county fairs, small clubs, and nostalgia conventions. He became a permanent sideshow attraction, but one who carried himself with an unwavering, almost noble dignity. He continued to record albums, always faithful to his antique repertoire, a relic steadfastly refusing to fade away. The final, eerie chapter of his life seemed scripted by a writer with a taste for dark poetry. In November 1996, while performing at a women's club event in Minneapolis, the 77-year-old performer was singing his signature song, "Tiptoe Through the Tulips." As he reached the final notes, he suffered a massive heart attack and collapsed on stage. He never regained consciousness and died a few hours later. His life ended as it had been lived, in the spotlight, in the middle of the very song that had made him a star, a final, strange coincidence that sealed his legacy as one of American music's most unforgettable and genuinely peculiar souls. While the bizarre public spectacles of Tiny Tim and the destructive energy of Disco Demolition Night captivated the mainstream, a more subterranean and peculiar legend began to circulate among musicians and sound engineers, one that dealt not with cultural impact but with a far more primal physical reaction. This is the myth of the brown note, a concept so unsettling it seems ripped from the pages of a juvenile prank book. Yet it speaks volumes about our fascination with sound's power over the human body. The premise is simple, and for those with a weak stomach, horrifying. A specific, extremely low-frequency sound wave, typically said to be around 5 to 9 Hz, is purported to resonate with the human abdomen so powerfully that it causes an involuntary loss of bowel control. It's the sonic equivalent of a practical joke gone terribly wrong. A frequency that supposedly bypasses the brain and speaks directly to our most basic, involuntary functions. This legend found a natural home in the burgeoning worlds of dub, reggae, and later electronic dance music, where the pursuit of ever deeper, more physically palpable bass became a central obsession. Sound system culture, particularly as it developed in Jamaica, was a form of sonic warfare. Crews would compete to build the most powerful, earth-shaking stacks of speakers, capable of not just being heard but felt in the very core of one's being. The goal was a bass line so profound it would vibrate your chest cavity and rattle your bones. It was within this competitive, bass-obsessed environment that the brown note story flourished, often as a tongue-in-cheek warning or a tall tale about a rival sound system being so powerful it was literally dangerous. The myth was a hyperbolic testament to a system's potency, a way of saying that the low end wasn't just impressive, it was physically overwhelming. As electronic music evolved, the legend was co-opted by acts known for their punishing, low-frequency output. Artists like Bass Nectar and the Bomb Squad, producers for Public Enemy, who crafted dense, chaotic sonic landscapes built on a foundation of aggressive sub-bass, would sometimes reference the brown note in interviews or in their music's mythology. It became a piece of insider lore, a shared joke among fans and producers about the extreme limits of sound. The idea added a layer of transgressive danger to the concert experience. Attending a show known for its heavy bass became a kind of dare, a test of one's physical fortitude against the sheer power of the sound system. Promoters and sound engineers would sometimes play into the myth, warning audiences about the system's capabilities, all in good fun, but contributing to the persistent rumor. Of course, from a scientific standpoint, the brown note as an involuntary biological trigger is almost certainly a myth. Research into the effects of infrasound frequencies below the range of human hearing, which is about 20 Hz, has shown that these low frequencies can indeed cause a range of physical and psychological effects. Studies have documented sensations of unease, dread, chills, and even visual distortions in subjects exposed to powerful infrasound, partly because these frequencies resonate with the human body and can subtly vibrate the eyeballs. This is a plausible scientific explanation for feelings of supernatural presence in so-called haunted locations where infrasound can occur naturally. However, no credible scientific study has ever demonstrated that any specific frequency can cause the specific, targeted muscular relaxation required for the alleged brown note effect. The human body is simply too complex, and bowel control involves a sophisticated system of voluntary and involuntary muscles that aren't so easily overridden by a single sound wave. Yet the persistence of the legend is far more revealing than its scientific falsehood. The brown note endures because it serves as a perfect metaphor for the visceral, undeniable power of low-end frequencies in music. Bass is the physical element of sound. We don't just hear it with our ears, we feel it in our chests, our stomachs, our feet on a vibrating floor. It's the frequency that connects music directly to the body, triggering instinctual responses from the urge to dance to a feeling of awe. The brown note myth exaggerates this physical connection to its most extreme and embarrassing conclusion, embodying the ultimate goal of certain musicians and sound designers: to create a sound so powerful it transcends entertainment and becomes a tangible, physical force. It represents the pursuit of a pure, unmediated physical experience through sound, a desire to move audiences not just emotionally, but literally, shaking them to their very foundation. In this way, the silly, apocryphal story of the brown note is a testament to the profound and often unnerving power we believe music can hold over us. While the legend of the brown note explored the physical power of sound, another holiday phenomenon proved that a song's emotional impact could be just as overwhelming, even when it was wrapped in the most bizarre and darkly comedic packaging imaginable. The story of how a novelty song about a drunken grandmother's death became a Christmas staple begins not in a recording studio but in a veterinary clinic. Elmo Shropshire, known professionally as Dr. Elmo, was a practicing veterinarian and a part-time folk singer in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 1978, his friend and songwriting partner, Randy Brooks, presented him with a song he had written called "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer." It was a country folk tune with a relentlessly cheerful melody, but its lyrics told a shockingly grim tale set on Christmas Eve. The story detailed an inebriated grandmother who, after consuming too much eggnog, staggers outside into the snow only to be fatally struck by Santa's sleigh. The song's narrator, presumably her grandson, then matter-of-factly describes the family's chilly reaction, noting that Grandpa's glib dismissal of the tragedy is proof that Santa Claus is real. Shropshire's initial reaction was one of pure bewilderment. The song's juxtaposition of a bouncy, festive arrangement with such a macabre subject was so absurd he thought it was a joke. He played it for a few friends at a party, and their uproarious laughter convinced him there might be something to it. With nothing to lose, he decided to record the track with his band. The session was as low budget as it gets, costing a mere $1,200. Dr. Elmo's vocal delivery was key to the song's strange charm. He sang with the deadpan earnestness of a folk balladeer, treating the ridiculous subject with a straight-faced sincerity that made it even funnier. When no record label showed interest in distributing what they saw as a tasteless joke, Shropshire took the ultimate DIY approach. He pressed a few thousand copies of the single on his own label, aptly named Elmo Shropshire Records, and stored the boxes in his garage, expecting to sell a handful to curious locals. The song's path to infamy was paved not by a marketing campaign, but by sheer, relentless hustle. Dr. Elmo became his own one-man promotion machine. He would drive from radio station to radio station, personally handing copies of the single to program directors and DJs, most of whom dismissed it immediately. His breakthrough came when he started targeting radio call-in shows. He would phone in, often pretending to be just a listener, and request his own song. When a station in Washington state finally gave it a spin, the switchboard lit up with calls. Listeners were either horrified or delighted, but they were all talking about it. This controversial reaction was exactly what radio thrives on. Stations across the country began playing it as a novelty, a once-a-year shock to the system amidst the endless loop of traditional carols. Dr. Elmo capitalized on this by constantly calling stations himself, ensuring the song never faded away. It was a masterclass in guerrilla marketing, turning a song that major labels had rejected into a word-of-mouth sensation purely through grassroots persistence. By the early 1980s, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer had become an unlikely holiday hit, eventually selling over 10 million copies and earning a gold record. Its legacy, however, is as deeply divided as the listener reactions that first propelled it to fame. For its fans, the song is a welcome dose of anarchic humor during a season often burdened by sentimental perfectionism. It's a cynical antidote to the schmaltz, a reminder that family holidays can be messy, strange, and darkly funny. For its detractors, the song is a crass, deeply unfunny affront to the spirit of Christmas, a celebration of callousness that makes light of a family tragedy. Music critics have routinely placed it on lists of both the worst and the best Christmas songs, a testament to its unique power to polarize. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the song has demonstrated incredible staying power. It has been translated into multiple languages, inspired a series of animated television specials, and continues to receive radio play every December, much to the chagrin of many and the delight of others. Dr. Elmo, the veterinarian-turned-accidental holiday icon, continued to perform the song for decades, fully embracing his quirky place in musical history. The song's endurance proves that the American holiday playlist has room for more than just goodwill and cheer. There is a permanent slot for the weird, the irreverent, and the downright strange. It stands as a monument to the idea that a hit record can come from anywhere, even from a garage full of vinyl and a veterinarian with a phone, as long as it captures the public's imagination for better or for worse. From the realm of silly holiday songs and unsettling sonic legends, we now turn to a story that challenges the very definition of what it means to be a musician. A story where the line between celebration and exploitation becomes dangerously blurred. In the bustling, grimy landscape of early 1990s Chicago, a towering, heavy-set man with a gentle demeanor could often be found on the city streets or in the corners of the city's alternative music clubs. His name was Wesley Willis, and he was an outsider artist whose bizarre and deeply personal music would carve out one of the most uniquely poignant chapters in American underground culture. Willis lived with profound, debilitating schizophrenia, a condition that filled his world with constant, tormenting auditory hallucinations which he referred to as demonic hell rides. Creating music became not just an artistic outlet for him, but a vital coping mechanism, a way to fight back against the chaos in his mind. His creative process was as singular as the man himself. Armed with a simple, battery-powered Casio keyboard, Wesley would sit and compose his songs by using the instrument's factory preset demo rhythms. He would select a beat, often the same polka or rock pattern, for dozens of songs, and then play a simple, repetitive bass melody over it with one finger on the keyboard. The music was rudimentary, a relentless and unchanging loop, but it was his voice that gave the songs their unforgettable character. He would sing spell in a deep, resonant baritone, delivering lyrics that were astonishingly literal and diary-like. He sang about the mundane details of his life, taking the bus, going to McDonald's, encountering people he knew, or his fierce loyalty to his favorite bands like the Smashing Pumpkins and Urge Overkill. Each song would build to a cathartic, screaming crescendo where he would shout a trademark phrase, most famously, "Rock over London, rock on Chicago," followed by a corporate slogan like Wheaties, breakfast of champions. For those who discovered him, the experience was jarring. His performances in Chicago clubs were legendary. He would sit at his keyboard, play his unvarying loops, and bellow his lyrics with intense conviction. Between songs, he would often offer headbutts to fans as a sign of affection, a gesture he called thumping the skulls of the demons. To some in the audience, it was a spectacle, a bizarre freak show that was both hilarious and unsettling. But for others, there was something undeniably powerful and authentic in his raw, unfiltered expression. He was not trying to be cool or commercial. He was simply documenting his existence, and in doing so, he created a body of work that was completely free of irony or pretense. This raw honesty resonated deeply within the jaded alternative rock scene, which was hungry for something that felt genuinely real. His transition from a local Chicago curiosity to a national cult figure was engineered by Dale Mayners, a member of the band The Wesley Willis Fiasco, who became his manager. Mayners helped Wesley record and release a staggering number of albums, literally hundreds of them, often sold out of the trunk of a car at shows. This is where the ethical questions surrounding his career become unavoidable. Was Wesley Willis being celebrated for his artistry, or was he being exploited for his disability? Critics argued that his managers and the labels that released his music were profiting from a man who may not have fully understood the complexities of the music business or the nature of his own fame. They pointed to his childlike trust and the fact that his lyrics often spoke of his poverty, even as he toured the country. Yet those who knew him well, including many fellow musicians, fiercely defend his legacy. They argue that Wesley was acutely aware of his fame and cherished it deeply. The money he earned from his music and performances allowed him to escape homelessness, afford medication, and support his family. For perhaps the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose and community. He was not a passive victim. He was an active participant who loved the roar of the crowd and the connection with his fans. The stage became a place where the demons were quiet, a sanctuary where he was not an outcast but a star. The relationship was undoubtedly complex, a symbiotic partnership that provided Wesley with material comfort and a platform, while giving the underground music world a figure of profound, unsettling authenticity. Tragically, Wesley's life was cut short. In 2003, at the age of 40, he died from complications of leukemia. His passing sparked an outpouring of grief from the music community, a testament to the deep impact he had made. His story remains a difficult but essential part of American music history. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about art, mental illness, and fame. Wesley Willis could not be easily categorized. He was not a traditionally skilled musician, yet he created a vast, unique catalog that continues to inspire. He was a man who suffered terribly, yet he found immense joy in sharing his strange vision with the world. His legacy is a testament to the power of raw, unfiltered human expression, and a permanent reminder that the American soundtrack has room for voices from the furthest edges of experience, voices that challenge us to listen more carefully to the strange and beautiful music of a life lived differently. While the raw, unfiltered expression of an artist like Wesley Willis existed far outside the mainstream, the world of musical parody has always operated by holding a funhouse mirror up to pop culture itself, and no one has mastered that art quite like Weird Al Yankovic. For decades, Al built a legendary career on his clever, good-natured spoofs of the biggest hits on the chart, from My Bologna to Eat It and Amish Paradise. His formula was dependable: identify a monster hit, craft a brilliantly silly lyrical alternative, and release it with a hilarious music video that often surpassed the original in creativity. But in 1999, at the turn of the millennium, Weird Al did something that defied his own formula and, according to a persistent fan legend, accidentally summoned a curse that would haunt his career for years. That something was an 11-minute-long original song called Albuquerque, a sprawling, nonsensical epic that closed his album Running with Scissors. The song itself is a masterpiece of absurdist storytelling. It begins with the narrator winning a contest where the first prize is a one-way ticket to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the second prize is a set of steak knives. The third prize is you get to not get tortured. This sets the tone for a shaggy dog story that spirals into a series of increasingly bizarre and disconnected vignettes. The narrator moves to Albuquerque, develops an addiction to sauerkraut, gets a worthless education, and finds a job at a box factory that only produces one box size, leading to his eventual nervous breakdown. The song's central and most infamous conflict arises when he visits a donut shop and orders a cruller, only to be told they are all out. A man named Stan, who coincidentally shares the narrator's name, enters and successfully orders the last cruller, sparking a lifelong, irrational feud. The narrative is deliberately meandering, pointless, and hysterically funny, delivered with Al's signature deadpan earnestness. It was a complete departure from his 3-minute pop parodies, an ambitious and self-indulgent dive into pure comedic chaos. For many fans, Albuquerque immediately became a cult classic, the ultimate deep-cut treasure. But in the years that followed its release, a strange pattern seemed to emerge. The new millennium brought a shift in the music industry. The rise of file sharing and the decline of MTV's influence on popular music made the traditional album and video cycle less effective. Weird Al's next few albums, while still beloved by his core audience, didn't achieve the same broad commercial penetration as his 80s and 90s work. He was still a successful touring act, but his presence on the pop culture radar seemed to dim. This perceived downturn led to the birth of the Albuquerque curse theory. The idea, circulated on fan forums and whispered at concerts, was that by creating such a wildly self-indulgent, non-parody epic, Al had somehow angered the comedy gods. The curse stated that his focus on this bizarre original piece, a song that had nothing to do with spoofing a current hit, had thrown off his musical karma, leading to a period of relative commercial obscurity. The curse, however, was no match for the unpredictable forces of the internet age. Weird Al's revenge began not on the radio but on emerging platforms like YouTube. His meticulously crafted music videos, which had always been his strong suit, found a second life online, reaching new generations of fans who discovered his work through viral sharing. He cleverly adapted to the new media landscape, releasing a series of polka medley videos and new parodies that quickly amassed millions of views. The cultural tide was turning back in his favor, and the stage was set for a monumental return. The curse-breaking moment arrived in 2014 with the release of his album, Mandatory Fun. In a brilliant marketing stroke, Al released a new music video every day for 8 days straight, partnering with popular websites like Funny or Die and Nerdist for maximum impact. Parodies like Tacky of Farrell's Happy and Word Crimes, a genius grammar lesson set to Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines, became instant viral sensations. The result was a cultural earthquake that nobody in the industry saw coming. Mandatory Fun debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 album chart. This wasn't just a personal best for Weird Al. It was the first comedy album to reach #1 in over 50 years since Alan Sherman in the early 1960s. It was a stunning vindication, a demonstration that his unique brand of humor was not only still relevant but capable of dominating the mainstream in the 21st century. The so-called Albuquerque curse was not just broken, it was utterly obliterated. In a beautiful twist of fate, the very song that was blamed for his downturn became a celebrated part of his legacy, often requested as a marathon encore at his live shows, where audiences joyfully shout along to every ridiculous tangent. The story of the curse and its reversal is ultimately a testament to artistic endurance and the power of adapting to change. It proves that sometimes the weirdest detour in an artist's career, a long, strange trip to a donut shop in Albuquerque, can become an essential part of their legend, a quirky chapter in a story that ends not with a curse, but with a well-deserved and hilarious victory lap. As the Grateful Dead's music began to weave its long, strange trip through the heart of the San Francisco scene, their sound was anchored by a musician who seemed like a spectral visitor from another era. Ron "Pigpen" McKernan was the band's original keyboardist and frontman, a raw, blues-soaked soul who stood in stark contrast to the psychedelic explorations happening around him. While his bandmates were venturing into cosmic jams, Pigpen was the grounding force, his fingers pounding the Hammond organ with a church meets juke joint ferocity, his voice a gravelly testament to a life lived hard. He was the undeniable heart of the early Dead, a magnetic presence on stage during their residency at Ken Kesey's Acid Tests and the famed Fillmore West. These venues were more than just concert halls. They were crucibles of a new consciousness where the boundaries of reality were intentionally dissolved by both art and chemistry. In this hazy, unpredictable atmosphere where perception was constantly shifting, it was perhaps inevitable that the line between a living, breathing musician and a supernatural legend would begin to blur. It was within the labyrinthine backstage corridors and shadowy balconies of these iconic venues that a peculiar piece of folklore took root. Stagehands and musicians began whispering about a mysterious, disfigured figure who was occasionally glimpsed lurking in the upper reaches of theaters like the Fillmore West. This was not a story born from a press release or a song lyric. It was an oral tradition passed between roadies and crew members after long, late nights. The tale described a lonely, phantom-like presence, a man who knew the hidden passages of the old buildings intimately, appearing only as a fleeting shadow or a pair of eyes watching from the darkness before vanishing without a trace. In the sleep-deprived, often psychedelically enhanced state of the crew, these brief sightings fermented into a full-blown myth. They started referring to this unseen occupant as the Phantom of the Fillmore, a ghost story tailor-made for the psychedelic era. The timeline of this San Francisco phantom tale is what makes a potential connection to one of the biggest musicals in history so tantalizing, albeit highly speculative. Andrew Lloyd Webber's mega hit The Phantom of the Opera first opened in London's West End in 1986. However, the idea had been germinating for years prior. Webber has stated his inspiration came primarily from seeing a theatrical version of the original 1910 Gaston Leroux novel in the 1970s. But the world of musical theater, like any creative endeavor, is a sponge absorbing influences from the surrounding culture, sometimes unconsciously. The story of the Fillmore's Phantom was a known piece of counterculture lore by the late 1960s and early 70s, circulating in the very circles where artists and bohemians mingled. While there is no direct evidence that Webber ever heard this specific story, it exists as a fascinating historical echo, a real-life American rock and roll ghost story that bizarrely mirrors the plot of the famous musical, born just as the composer might have been first considering the project. This connection, however tenuous, serves as a perfect emblem of the San Francisco psychedelic scene's unique relationship with reality. The Phantom wasn't just a ghost, he was a mythologized byproduct of an environment where sensory input was intentionally amplified and distorted. The legend likely wove together several threads: the genuine, eerie atmosphere of old, creaky theaters late at night, the paranoid perceptions fueled by powerful psychedelics where a simple stagehand checking a light could be transformed into a monstrous apparition, and the romantic, gothic sensibility that the scene embraced. It was a story that could only have been born in a specific time and place, where the weird was not just accepted but celebrated, and where the idea of a tortured genius hiding in the shadows of a palace of art felt less like a 19th century novel and more like a plausible, if strange reality right outside the dressing room door. The tale of the phantom, whether he ever truly existed or not, remains a testament to the power of that era to generate its own enduring and wonderfully bizarre mythology. Meanwhile, as the underground legends of the Grateful Dead were inspiring ghost stories in the rafters of the Fillmore, a very different kind of phenomenon was being engineered not in a smoky club, but in a boardroom with the specific goal of invading every corner of public life. The story of the Macana is a masterclass in the bizarre alchemy of the music industry, a tale of how a breezy flamenco pop trifle from Spain was transformed through a combination of sheer force and strategic weirdness into the inescapable soundtrack of America in 1996. The song's origins are almost comically humble. It was written and recorded in 1992 by the Spanish duo Los Del Rio, a pair of middle-aged musicians named Antonio Romero and Rafael Ruiz. The original song, Macana, was a modest hit in Latin America and Spain, a catchy tune about a woman named Macana from the port city of Puerto Santa Maria. It was pleasant, unassuming, and destined for a quiet life as a regional favorite. The song's first unlikely break came during a VIP party on a Venezuelan cruise ship in 1994. The guest of honor was none other than the wife of the then President of the United States, First Lady Hillary Clinton. The band for the event was Los Del Rio, and when they played Macana, something peculiar happened. According to band lore, Mrs. Clinton was so taken with the simple, shuffling rhythm that she asked the band to play it again. A photograph of the First Lady smiling and clapping along found its way into the press, and while it wasn't a massive story, it provided a crucial sliver of stateside credibility. This tiny spark of high-profile endorsement caught the attention of an ambitious Miami-based record executive named Rafael de Pavon at Bayside Records. He heard something in the song that others had missed. Not just a catchy melody, but a skeletal structure of pure, unadulterated rhythm that was begging for a remix. What happened next was a calculated, almost clinical dissection of the song's DNA. Bayside Records didn't just license the track, they reverse-engineered it for maximum global appeal. Their first move was to commission a series of club remixes from producers like the Bayside Boys. These versions stripped away much of the original's acoustic flavor, replacing it with a thumping, synthesized disco beat that was perfectly tailored for the dance floors of the emerging 90s club scene. But the truly bizarre and brilliant stroke was the creation of an English version. Instead of a straightforward translation, the label opted for something far stranger. They kept the original chorus of Macana, but wrote entirely new verses in English that were, upon closer inspection, utterly absurd and surprisingly suggestive. The lyrics tell the story of a woman named Macana who, while her boyfriend is away being drafted into the army, enjoys dancing and is pursued by two friends named Vittorino and Dione. The chorus cheerfully encourages her to give her body joy, Macana, because your body is for giving joy and good things. It was a song about a woman potentially cheating on her soldier boyfriend, set to the happiest, most mindless tune imaginable. This disconnect between the lyrics and the music was the secret weapon. The dark undercurrent of the story was completely obscured by the song's second, and most important, engineered component, the dance. Bayside Records, understanding that a physical routine could make the song an interactive event, helped popularize a simple, six-step sequence of arm movements and hip swivels. It was so easy that anyone, from a child at a birthday party to a politician at a rally, could learn it in seconds. The record label then executed a marketing campaign of breathtaking aggression and omnipresence. They flooded radio stations with the single, but their real genius was in placement. They ensured that Macana was played at every conceivable public gathering: baseball games, school dances, wedding receptions, and block parties. The dance was a virus, and the label provided the perfect conditions for it to spread. The result was a cultural takeover unlike anything seen before. In the summer of '96, you could not escape the Macarena. It topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 14 weeks. It was played at the Democratic National Convention, where a painfully awkward Vice President Al Gore attempted the dance, cementing its status as a mandatory cultural touchstone. It was the anthem of the Olympics in Atlanta. The song's success was so vast that it became a paradox, a worldwide smash performed by two men who remained virtually anonymous. Antonio Romero and Rafael Ruiz of Los Del Rio became the faces of a song that had been so heavily processed and marketed by others that they were almost incidental to its success. The Macarena demonstrated that in the modern music industry, a hit record wasn't always about artistic expression. It could be a product of ruthless, brilliant marketing, a perfectly engineered piece of audiovisual candy that bypassed the brain and headed straight for the hips, proving that sometimes the weirdest thing about a song isn't its sound, but the calculated machinery behind it. Rise, just as the meticulously engineered dance craze of the Macarena showed how a simple idea could be weaponized for global domination, the nascent world of online video was about to birth a different kind of phenomenon, one that questioned the very nature of authenticity on the internet. In the summer of 2006, YouTube was still a digital Wild West, a new frontier where anyone with a webcam could become a broadcaster. It was in this uncharted landscape that a user named LonelyGirl15 began uploading confessional video blogs from her bedroom. She introduced herself as Bree, a 16-year-old homeschooled girl living a sheltered life under the strict watch of her deeply religious parents. Her videos were intimate and low quality, filled with the awkward pauses and hesitant speech of a genuine teenager. She talked about her frustrations, her crushes, and her secret rebellion against her family's beliefs, all while bathed in the unflattering glow of her computer screen. The authenticity was the hook. Viewers didn't just watch Bree's story, they invested in it. They left thousands of comments offering advice, sharing their own experiences, and forming a protective community around this seemingly vulnerable girl. As the channel grew, attracting millions of views, the narrative began to twist into stranger territory. Bree's friend Daniel was introduced, and the plot started to feel more like a suspense thriller, involving a mysterious organization called The Order that her parents seemed to be part of. This shift sparked the first whispers of suspicion. A community of online sleuths, dubbed the LG-15 Detection Agency, began a forensic analysis of the videos. They scrutinized background details, analyzed lighting angles, and even identified a shampoo bottle in one shot that was only sold in New Zealand. The mounting evidence pointed to a chilling conclusion. Bree was not a real girl, and her life was not what it seemed. The revelation, when it came, was a watershed moment for internet culture. In September 2006, the truth was exposed by mainstream media outlets. LonelyGirl15 was an elaborate work of fiction. Bree was played by a 19-year-old New Zealand-born actress named Jessica Lee Rose, and the series was the creation of three filmmakers, Mesh Flinders, Miles Beckett, and Greg Goodfried, who saw the potential of YouTube as a new narrative medium. The public reaction was a volatile mix of betrayal and fascination. Many fans felt deeply duped, their emotional investment exposed as a manipulation. Yet for others, the unveiling transformed the experience from a passive viewing into an interactive puzzle. The hoax itself became the story, a masterfully executed piece of guerrilla filmmaking that blurred the lines between reality and performance in a way television never could. This groundbreaking deception, while not musical in itself, directly rewired the playbook for how musicians would engage with their audience in the digital age. LonelyGirl15 proved that the internet audience craved mystery and was willing to participate in an unfolding narrative. Bands quickly recognized the power of this new form of storytelling, known as an alternate reality game or ARG. Just a year after the Lonely Girl 15 reveal, 9 Inch Nails launched an incredibly complex ARG to promote their album, Year Zero. It began with fans discovering USB drives left at concerts containing unreleased music and cryptic messages pointing to a dystopian future. This led them to a sprawling network of fake websites, phone numbers, and hidden codes that built an intricate world around the album's themes. The fans weren't just listeners, they were active archaeologists piecing together the narrative themselves. Similarly, the robotic helmets of Daft Punk were no longer just a cool visual gimmick. They became the centerpiece of an entire mythos that the duo meticulously cultivated. Their personas were so complete and impenetrable that they functioned as a permanent ARG, forcing the media and fans to focus entirely on the music and the legend, never the men behind the machines. This strategy of calculated ambiguity and world-building, pioneered by viral hoaxes like Lonely Girl 15, allowed artists to create a deeper, more immersive experience. It shifted music marketing from simply selling albums to inviting fans into a universe, making them co-conspirators in a grand, shared secret. The lonely girl in her bedroom was a fictional character, but the cultural ripple she created was profoundly real, teaching a generation of creators that in the digital age, the most powerful stories are often the ones that ask the audience to question what is real. And while the saga of Milli Vanilli exposed the dangers of a completely fabricated performance, another legendary band found itself defending the very opposite, the authentic, spontaneous spark of musical inspiration, in a courtroom battle that would question the origins of one of rock's most sacred texts. The opening notes of Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven are arguably the most recognizable in all of classic rock, a delicate, descending acoustic guitar line that has served as a gateway to hard rock for generations of listeners. For decades, its creation was part of rock and roll lore, attributed to the genius of guitarist Jimmy Page during the band's retreat to a remote Welsh cottage called Headley Grange. But beneath this official story ran a persistent, whispered allegation that the song's iconic introduction was not entirely original, that it bore a striking resemblance to a much more obscure piece of music, an instrumental called Taurus by the American psychedelic band Spirit. The connection was more than just musical coincidence, it was rooted in a specific moment in time. In 1968 and 1969, Spirit was a rising act, known for their jazz-inflected rock and complex compositions. Led Zeppelin, then a new band exploding onto the scene, shared the bill with Spirit for several concerts on their early American tours. It was during these dates that Randy Wolf, Spirit's guitarist who performed under the name Randy California, claimed that Jimmy Page would often watch their sets from the side of the stage, paying close attention to their music. Taurus, a brief, beautiful instrumental from Spirit's self-titled debut album, features a similar descending chromatic chord progression played on acoustic guitar, creating a melancholy, medieval atmosphere. For years, California mentioned the similarity in interviews, expressing a mixture of resignation and frustration, but he never pursued formal legal action, perhaps feeling it was a battle he could not win against one of the biggest bands in the world. The case erupted into the legal system decades later, long after Randy California had tragically drowned in 1997 while saving his son from a rip current. In 2014, a trustee for his estate filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Led Zeppelin, arguing that the opening of Stairway to Heaven was substantially similar to the protected elements of Taurus. The case immediately plunged into the bizarre and often counterintuitive intricacies of copyright law. The central and most contentious issue was the concept of the inverse ratio rule. This legal principle suggested that if there was a high degree of proof that the alleged copier had access to the original work, which Led Zeppelin undoubtedly did, having toured with Spirit, then a lower degree of similarity between the two works was required to prove infringement. This put immense pressure on the defense to prove a negative, that Jimmy Page and Robert Plant had never heard Taurus, or that if they had, they hadn't consciously or unconsciously copied it. The trial, which took place in 2016, became a media spectacle, pitting the mythic stature of rock gods against the poignant story of an underappreciated artist. The courtroom was treated to the surreal sight of Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, now elder statesmen of rock, taking the stand to defend their creative process. Page, in particular, presented a detailed account of the writing of Stairway, describing it as a gradual, collaborative process that unfolded over time at Headley Grange. He acknowledged owning a copy of Spirit's album, but testified that he had no specific memory of the song Taurus. Under cross-examination, he was presented with a transcript of a 1970-old radio interview where he praised Spirit as a good band, a point the plaintiffs used to reinforce the access argument. Robert Plant testified about writing the lyrics, describing how they came to him in a sudden burst of inspiration, further cementing the defense's narrative of organic creation. The most dramatic moment, however, came not from the rock stars but from the musical evidence itself. The jury was not allowed to hear the recorded versions of the songs, as copyright protects the underlying composition, the notes on sheet music, not the specific sound recording. Instead, they heard a musicologist hired by the plaintiff play the two melodies on a piano, one after the other, in a sterile, clinical setting that stripped away the production, the instrumentation, and the emotional weight of the performances. This was a crucial advantage for the defense. While the descending chord progression was indeed similar, the defense successfully argued that the pattern itself was a common musical building block, a sequence that had been used for centuries in everything from classical music to folk songs. They presented examples of other songs that used similar progressions, arguing that Spirit did not own a copyright on a basic musical idea that existed in the public domain. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated and found in favor of Led Zeppelin. The verdict was a massive victory for the band, but it left the music world deeply divided. For supporters of Led Zeppelin, the ruling was a triumph for artistic inspiration over legalistic nitpicking, affirming that all artists build upon the language of music that came before them. For critics, however, the verdict was a miscarriage of justice, a case where a multi-million-dollar band's legal team successfully obscured what they saw as a clear case of borrowing from a less powerful artist. The Stairway to Heaven case did not provide a clean, satisfying answer. Instead, it highlighted the inherent ambiguity in the creative process. It forced us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the line between subconscious influence and outright theft is vanishingly thin, and that in the collaborative, referential world of rock and roll, the most legendary riffs might always carry whispers of their forgotten ancestors. From the polished artifice of the pop world and the cerebral puzzles of online hoaxes, we journey now into a subculture so uniquely American, so deliberately bizarre, that it managed to confuse the federal government itself. In the decaying urban landscape of Detroit in the late 1980s, two friends, Joseph Bruce and Joseph Utzler, began performing as a rap duo called Inner City Posse. Their early sound was gritty and hardcore, but it was when they adopted clown face paint and reinvented themselves as Insane Clown Posse that they stumbled upon a formula for a strange and lasting legacy. Their music was a cartoonish, hyper-violent spectacle, a form of horrorcore hip-hop that blended gritty beats with lyrics about murder, mayhem, and the supernatural, all delivered with a theatrical, over-the-top glee. To the uninitiated, it was shocking, even repellent, but for a growing legion of disenfranchised fans, primarily young people from working class and rural backgrounds who felt alienated by mainstream culture, ICP's music was a revelation. It was a celebration of the weird, the rejected, and the misunderstood, and it spoke to them with a surprising sincerity. This connection between the band and their fans, who proudly called themselves Juggalos, was forged in the chaotic, baptismal atmosphere of their live shows. An ICP concert is less a musical performance and more a participatory ritual. The central sacrament of this ritual is Faygo soda, a cheap, Detroit-based soft drink that ICP began using as a prop early on because it was affordable. What started as a simple spray into the crowd evolved into a full-scale artillery assault. During their sets, gallons of Faygo are shaken and unleashed, raining sticky, carbonated soda over the entire audience in a communal shower of sticky chaos. The symbolism is potent. It's a shared, messy, and joyous experience that breaks down barriers and creates an instant sense of belonging. But the music itself is built on a surprisingly intricate, if convoluted, philosophical foundation known as the Dark Carnival. This mythology, spread across their albums, presents a kind of moralistic amusement park run by supernatural beings. Each album is a new Joker's card, revealing a different character like the Ringmaster or the Great Milenko, who tests individuals with temptations. The ultimate message, buried beneath the gore and profanity, is a simple one: choose a righteous path or face eternal damnation in the end. It's a bizarre, comic book version of a morality play. This fiercely independent and intentionally outsider community might have remained a niche curiosity, if not for a decision that catapulted them into national headlines. In 2011, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Gang Threat Assessment included a section that sent shockwaves through the Juggalo world. In a document analyzing the most dangerous criminal enterprises in the country, the FBI officially classified Juggalos as a loose hybrid gang. The report cited isolated incidents where individuals who identified as Juggalos had committed crimes, often involving petty theft or drug use, and pointed to the group's shared symbols, most notably the Hatchetman logo, as gang insignia. For the millions of fans who saw Juggalo life as a family, a support network for people who didn't fit in anywhere else, the classification was not just inaccurate, it was profoundly insulting. It was a case of institutional misunderstanding on a grand scale, where the government was criminalizing a fandom based on the actions of a tiny minority. The immediate and unintended consequence of the FBI's report was to do what ICP had been trying to do for years. It unified the Juggalos like never before. The classification created a common enemy, a powerful us versus them dynamic that transformed their sense of community into one of resistance. What was once a subculture was now, in their eyes, a persecuted class. This newfound solidarity was channeled into organized political action. ICP and their fans launched a formal protest, including a lawsuit against the Justice Department and the FBI, arguing that the designation violated their constitutional rights to free association. They organized annual gatherings called the Juggalo March on Washington, where thousands of painted-faced fans descended on the nation's capital to peacefully demonstrate, chanting "Family, family," and demanding the gang classification be revoked. The legal battle has been protracted and largely unsuccessful in court, but as a public relations campaign, it was a masterstroke, galvanizing the community and drawing more attention to their cause. Simultaneously, the duo had been building a remarkable, self-sufficient empire entirely outside the traditional music industry. Through their label Psychopathic Records, Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope created a vertically integrated world for their fans. They didn't just release their own music, they signed other like-minded artists, creating a roster of acts that appealed to the Juggalo sensibility. They produced their own merchandise, from jerseys and jackets to jewelry, all emblazoned with their iconic logos. Most importantly, they created their own annual festival, the Gathering of the Juggalos. This multi-day event is the culmination of their philosophy, a temporary autonomous zone where tens of thousands of people come together for music, wrestling, comedy, and a powerful sense of communal acceptance. It's a place where the weird are normal and the mainstream world is left far behind. The story of Insane Clown Posse is a testament to the power of building your own world when the existing one doesn't understand you. They proved that by embracing the bizarre, celebrating the outsider, and remaining fiercely loyal to their community, you could create a cultural phenomenon so unique and resilient that even an attempt to dismantle it by the highest authorities would only make it stronger. While many of the stories we've explored unfolded within the borders of the United States, the unpredictable currents of American culture have a way of pulling in the most unexpected artifacts from abroad and giving them a truly bizarre second act. Such is the case with a song that is, technically, not American at all. In 1986, Australian singer John Farnham released a power ballad called "You're the Voice," a soaring, drum-heavy anthem that quickly became the defining song of his career and a massive hit across Europe and the United Kingdom. With its urgent message of individual empowerment and its stadium-ready chorus, it seemed tailor-made for the American market. Yet, when it was released stateside, it landed with a quiet, unceremonious thud, failing to crack the Billboard Hot 100 and fading into obscurity as just another foreign hit that didn't translate. For over 3 decades, it remained a beloved relic for a niche group of fans, a brilliant song that had missed its moment in the world's largest music market. The song's path to American relevance would not be through traditional radio or a movie soundtrack, but through the deeply strange and highly charged engine of modern presidential politics. The year was 2020, and former Vice President Joe Biden was in the thick of a contentious Democratic primary campaign. His team, looking to create a compelling narrative around his candidacy, needed a song that conveyed a sense of hope, unity, and resilience. Somehow, they landed on this forgotten Australian anthem. A video was produced blending clips of Biden interacting with voters with the song's powerful crescendo. The choice was, on the surface, an odd one. This wasn't a classic American rock song or a typical patriotic tune. It was a 35-year-old track by an artist most Americans had never heard of. But something about the combination clicked. The video went viral, shared widely across social media platforms, and "You're the Voice" was suddenly introduced to millions of Americans in a completely new context. The reaction was immediate and deeply polarized, which only fueled the song's viral ascent. Supporters of the campaign found the song's message profoundly moving, a perfect encapsulation of the hopeful, collective action they felt Biden represented. The lyrics, "We have the chance to turn the pages over / we can write what we want to write," resonated as a direct repudiation of the political climate at the time. For them, the song was no longer just a pop ballad. It was a political statement, an anthem for a movement. Conversely, critics of the candidate seized on the strangeness of the choice. They mocked the adoption of an obscure foreign song, questioning its appropriateness and using it as a cudgel to portray the campaign as out of touch. This controversy, however, served only to amplify the song's reach, creating a feedback loop where more people sought it out simply to understand what everyone was arguing about. This bizarre second life for "You're the Voice" highlights a fundamental shift in how cultural touchstones are now created. In the past, a song's American success was dictated by gatekeepers, radio programmers, record label executives, and MTV. The journey was linear and controlled. In the 21st century, that model has been shattered by the chaotic, democratic power of social media. A song can be plucked from total obscurity by a viral meme, a television show, or a political campaign, and can achieve a level of fame that bypasses the traditional music industry entirely. The engine for this is not airplay, but algorithm-driven sharing, where the emotional resonance or controversial nature of a piece of content is what propels it forward. John Farnham's song didn't need a radio promoter. It needed a political moment and a hashtag. For John Farnham himself, watching this unfold from the other side of the world must have been a surreal experience. After a lifetime in music, he was witnessing his greatest hit, a song that had already achieved legendary status everywhere else, finally finding its American audience, not as a piece of 80s nostalgia, but as a newly minted political anthem. The song experienced a massive surge in streams and digital downloads, charting on American platforms for the first time ever. The story of You're the Voice is a perfect modern parable about the endurance of a great song and the utterly unpredictable ways that culture now travels. It proves that a song's time may not have passed just because it failed upon its first release. It might simply be waiting for the right moment and the right strange set of circumstances to finally find its voice. Of all the strange paths a song can take through popular culture, few are as delightfully absurd as the journey of a slick, forgettable piece of 80s pop that was reborn 2 decades later as the cornerstone of one of the internet's first global inside jokes. The story begins not in a digital realm, but in the world of British stock, Aitken and Waterman, the hit-making production trio known for their assembly line approach to crafting perfect pop confections. In 1987, they introduced the world to Rick Astley, a 21-year-old with a shockingly deep, soulful voice that seemed at odds with his boyish appearance. His debut single, Never Gonna Give You Up, was a quintessential product of its time, a buoyant dance track built on a relentlessly cheerful synth riff and a drum machine backbeat, with Astley's earnest vocals pledging unwavering devotion. It was designed for one purpose, to be a hit, and a hit it was, skyrocketing to #1 on charts around the world, including the United States, and making Rick Astley an instant, if somewhat fleeting, star. For most of the next 20 years, the song existed exactly as you'd expect. It was a staple on 80s nostalgia compilations, a track that would elicit a smile of recognition at a wedding reception before everyone hurried back to the buffet. It was a pleasant artifact, utterly unremarkable in the grand scheme of pop music, but the seeds of its bizarre second act were being sown in the chaotic, anonymous forums of the early internet, particularly on a website called 4chan. In the mid-2000s, users on the site /v/board, dedicated to video games, developed a prank known as duck rolling. They would post a link promising a sneak peek at an upcoming game or a piece of juicy gossip, but when clicked, it would redirect to an image of a duck on wheels. It was a simple, silly troll specific to that small, insular community. The pivotal shift happened in 2007. Someone whose identity is lost to digital history replaced the duck image with a link to the music video for Never Gonna Give You Up. The prank was an instant upgrade. Instead of a static picture, the victim was greeted by the sudden sight of a young Rick Astley, dressed in a trench coat and dancing awkwardly against a grainy backdrop. The contrast was perfect. The video's sheer earnestness, its complete lack of irony, was the ultimate punchline in an online world that was becoming increasingly self-aware and cynical. The practice was christened Rickrolling, and it spread through 4chan like wildfire. From there, it leapt across the digital landscape. It infested YouTube comment sections, MySpace pages, and forum posts everywhere. The beauty of the Rickroll was its simplicity and its universality. You didn't need to be a hardcore internet user to get the joke. The surprise, the minor annoyance, and the eventual chuckle of recognition were feelings anyone could experience. The phenomenon achieved true critical mass on Easter Sunday in 2008, when the internet executed its most spectacular Rickroll. The official trailer for the highly anticipated video game, Grand Theft Auto 4, was set to premiere on YouTube. Millions of fans clicked the link the moment it went live, eager for their first look at the game. Instead of gritty gameplay, they were met with Rick Astley's smiling face and the opening synth notes of Never Gonna Give You Up. The trailer had been hijacked. This wasn't a prank by a random user. It was a coordinated effort that demonstrated the sheer scale and power of this new form of collective humor. The event was covered by mainstream news outlets, introducing the concept of Rickrolling to a global audience that had never heard of 4chan. The meme was now a cultural force. For Rick Astley himself, the resurrection was surreal. After his initial fame had faded, he had left the music industry altogether, content with a quiet life out of the spotlight. Suddenly, he was more famous than he had ever been in the 80s, but for reasons he never could have anticipated. to his immense credit, he embraced the joke with grace and good humor. He understood that the rickroll wasn't malicious, it was a bizarre form of tribute. This acceptance culminated in one of the most perfect collisions of internet culture and mainstream tradition imaginable. In 2008, Rick Astley was invited to perform Never Gonna Give You Up live in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. There he was, in front of millions of television viewers, singing the song straight without a hint of irony, while a giant inflatable Snoopy floated nearby. It was a moment of beautiful cognitive dissonance. The song had been completely stripped of its original meaning as a romantic pledge and recontextualized as a symbol of shared online experience. The parade performance was the ultimate validation of the meme, a signal that this weird digital joke had become a legitimate, if utterly peculiar, piece of modern folklore. The legacy of rickrolling is profound. It was one of the first memes to demonstrate the internet's power to rewrite cultural history, to pluck an artifact from the past and end Chinese letter it a completely new meaning for a new generation. It created a shared language, a moment of connection where someone who understood the reference felt part of a global community. The rickroll proved that in the digital age, a song's journey doesn't end when it falls off the charts. It can lie dormant for decades, waiting for the right strange set of circumstances to awaken it, not as a nostalgic relic, but as the centerpiece of a joke that an entire planet was in on. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the weirdest thing about a piece of music isn't how it was made, but what we collectively decide to do with it long after the artist has left the stage. But if the saga of rickrolling showed how the internet could resurrect a pop song as a global gag, a different kind of resurrection was taking place on the gritty stages of 1970s New York, one that would reclaim a rock and roll standard and infuse it with a ferocious new spirit. The original Gloria, as recorded by the Irish band, them featuring a young Van Morrison in 1964, was a perfect snapshot of its time, a raw garage rock anthem built on a simple, driving bass line and Morrison's impassioned howl. It was a song of pure, unadulterated desire, a young man's declaration of obsession for a mysterious girl who walked past his door each evening. The perspective was entirely male, a celebration of the female as an object of almost mythical allure. For over a decade, it remained a classic covered by countless bands, but always within that same framework of teenage longing. Then, in 1975, a poet and performer named Patti Smith picked up the song and didn't just cover it, she possessed it. She chose it as the opening track for her landmark debut album, Horses, and from the very first second, it was clear this was a hostile takeover. The album begins not with music, but with a stark, declarative statement: Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. Spoken in a flat, almost bored tone over a single, hesitant piano chord, the line was a Molotov cocktail thrown at the foundations of rock tradition. It wasn't just a rejection of religious dogma, it was a declaration of absolute personal freedom, a statement that the singer was claiming authority for herself, refusing to be saved or defined by any external force, be it divine or musical. This one line set the stage for a complete dismantling and reassembly of Gloria. What follows is a slow, deliberate build that feels less like a song and more like an exorcism. Smith and her band, particularly the brilliant pianist Richard Soule, stretch the familiar riff into a tense, atmospheric crawl. Smith begins to speak, her voice shifting from a conversational murmur to a prophetic incantation. She weaves a new narrative around the edges of the old one, describing a scene on a stoop, a teenage boy with a bolt of lightning on his t-shirt, a sense of restless energy and sexual ambiguity. She isn't singing about Gloria, she is embodying a new consciousness that is about to encounter Gloria. This long, poetic intro lasts for nearly 3 minutes, creating a palpable sense of anticipation before the first recognizable chord of the original song finally crashes in. When the familiar riff does arrive, it's not a nostalgic throwback, it's a release of pent-up energy, a raw explosion of punk rock fury. But the most radical transformation is in the pronoun. Van Morrison sang, "She comes around here / just about midnight." Patti Smith snarls, "He goes to the highway / and he opens up his door." In a single stroke, she shifts the perspective from the male gaze to a female one, from being the object of desire to being the subject who desires. She doesn't just sing the song, she rewrites it in real time, claiming the right to the same raw, predatory passion that had been the exclusive domain of male rockers for decades. The song becomes a sprawling, nearly 6-minute epic that oscillates between tender recollection and ferocious release, with Smith's voice cracking, yelping, and screaming the name, Gloria, not as a plea but as a triumphant, self-actualized declaration. The performance was a revolutionary act. At a time when rock music was dominated by the virtuosic excesses of prog rock and the slickness of California singer-songwriters, Smith's Gloria was a return to primal energy, but with a sophisticated literary sensibility. She connected the dots between the French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud and the 3-chord stomp of garage rock, proving that intellectualism and raw power were not mutually exclusive. Her version didn't erase the original. Instead, it entered into a dialogue with it, critiquing its limitations while celebrating its raw power. She showed that a classic song wasn't a sacred text to be reverently reproduced, but a canvas upon which a new artist could paint their own reality. In tearing apart Gloria and rebuilding it in her own image, Patti Smith didn't just record a great cover. She authored a manifesto for the punk rock and new wave movements that would follow, forever altering the landscape of what was possible for a woman with a microphone and a mission. But if the saga of rickrolling showed how the internet could resurrect a pop song as a global gag, and Patti Smith's reinvention of Gloria demonstrated the power of artistic reclamation, there exists a song whose story is the ultimate battle between corporate ownership and cultural common sense. It's a melody so simple, so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives, that most of us never stop to consider who, if anyone, could possibly own it. For generations, singing "Happy Birthday to You" was as natural as breathing, a ritual performed at countless kitchen tables and birthday parties around the world. But for nearly all of the 20th century, this act of communal celebration had a hidden price tag, enforced by one of the most aggressive and bizarre copyright claims in musical history. The song's journey from a classroom greeting to a corporate cash cow, and finally to a symbol of public victory, is a surreal tale of how a piece of music can become trapped between its universal appeal and the relentless machinery of profit. The true origins of "Happy Birthday to You" lie not in a corporate boardroom, but in a kindergarten classroom in Louisville, Kentucky in the 1890s. Two sisters, Patti Smith Hill, a kindergarten teacher, and Mildred J. Hill, a pianist and composer, collaborated to create a simple song for their young students. Mildred composed the melody while Patti wrote the lyrics, which were originally, "Good morning to you / good morning to you / good morning, dear children / good morning to all." This song, "Good Morning to All," was published in 1893 in a songbook called Song Stories for the Kindergarten, and it was intended as an easy, gentle way for children to start their day. The simple, ascending melody was perfectly crafted for young voices, making it an instant hit in educational circles. At some point, as the story goes, the tradition began of substituting the "good morning" lyrics with "happy birthday" during classroom celebrations. This spontaneous act of folk creativity, people taking an existing tune and writing new, situation-specific words for it, is how most folk songs evolve. It was a natural, organic process that should have left the song in the public domain. The trouble began when the song started to appear in print with the "Happy Birthday" lyrics. In 1935, a company called the Summy Company registered a copyright for a piano arrangement of "Happy Birthday to You," crediting the Hill sisters as authors. This was the crucial, and many would later argue, fraudulent maneuver. The copyright wasn't for the melody itself, which by then was decades old, or even for the lyrics, which had been widely circulated and used for years. It was for a specific published arrangement. However, the Summy Company and its subsequent owners, including Warner/Chappell Music, who acquired it in 1988 for a staggering $25 million, began acting as if they owned the song in its entirety. They aggressively enforced this claim, demanding licensing fees anytime the song was used in a profit-making context. This meant that every time Happy Birthday was sung in a restaurant chain, used in a television show, or featured in a major motion picture, a payment was required to flow back to Warner/Chappell. The reality of this enforcement was as surreal as it was lucrative. For decades, filmmakers went to absurd lengths to avoid the song's licensing fee, which could run into tens of thousands of dollars. In the classic John Wayne film, The Searchers, the characters sing, "For he's a jolly good fellow," instead. The producers of the sitcom Cheers wrote an entirely original birthday song, "Happy Birthday, Frank," to sidestep the cost. Even mildly dystopian alternative birthday songs became a running gag in pop culture, a quiet testament to the chilling effect of the copyright claim. Meanwhile, Warner/Chappell was estimated to be collecting about $2 million a year in licensing fees for a song that no one believed they truly owned. The situation created a strange cognitive dissonance for the public. We all knew the song belonged to everyone, yet a powerful corporation was successfully charging rent on our collective memory. The turning point came from an unlikely source, a documentary filmmaker named Jennifer Nelson. While working on a film about the song itself, she paid a licensing fee of $4,500 to Warner/Chappell to include it. The sheer absurdity of the situation struck her, and she began to research the song's history. What she found was a paper trail that suggested the copyright claim was built on a very shaky foundation. In 2013, with the help of the non-profit law firm Public Citizen, Nelson filed a class action lawsuit against Warner/Chappell, arguing that the copyright was invalid and that the company had been unlawfully collecting millions of dollars for years. The case hinged on a critical piece of evidence, proving that the "Happy Birthday" lyrics had been published without a valid copyright notice long before the 1935 registration, which would have placed them in the public domain. The legal battle that followed was a deep dive into the dusty archives of American music publishing. The legal team unearthed a treasure trove of historical documents, including a 1927 songbook that contained the "Happy Birthday" lyrics without any copyright attribution to the Hill sisters. This was the smoking gun. It demonstrated that the version of the song everyone knew had been in wide circulation long before Summy Company claimed to own it. In September 2015, a federal judge delivered a landmark ruling, declaring that the Warner/Chappell copyright claim was invalid. The judge stated that there was no evidence the Hill sisters had ever written the "Happy Birthday" lyrics, and that even if they had, the song had been published without a copyright so long ago that any claim had long since expired. The ruling effectively placed "Happy Birthday to You" into the public domain where it always belonged. The outcome was more than just a legal victory, it was a cultural emancipation. After the ruling, Warner/Chappell agreed to a settlement of $14 million to reimburse anyone who had paid licensing fees for the song since 1949. More importantly, the case set a powerful precedent, challenging the ever-extending reach of corporate copyright over our shared cultural heritage. It was a story that reaffirmed a simple but profound truth: some things are too fundamental, too woven into the human experience to be owned. The bizarre legal saga of "Happy Birthday to You" serves as a permanent reminder that even the most powerful entities can be challenged when a simple melody represents not just a song but a right. While the fight over "Happy Birthday" was a battle about owning the past, the dawn of the 21st century would introduce a technological innovation so powerful it would fundamentally reshape the very sound of music's future, and it all started with a problem in the oil industry. The story of auto-tune begins not in a recording studio, but in the world of geophysical prospecting. Dr. Andy Hildebrand was an engineer with a background in digital signal processing who worked for Exxon, using seismic data analysis to help locate underground oil reserves. The technology involved sending sound waves into the earth and interpreting the echoes that bounced back, a process that required incredibly sophisticated algorithms to make sense of complex signals. After leaving the oil business, Hildebrand founded a company called Jupiter Systems, which created software for the same kind of intricate data interpretation, but for other fields. The legend goes that at a dinner party, a guest who knew of his work with sound waves jokingly challenged him to invent a machine that could help her sing in tune. That offhand comment sparked an idea. Hildebrand realized that the mathematical principles he used to analyze seismic echoes could be applied to the human voice, identifying the fundamental pitch of a vocal performance and then subtly shifting it to the nearest correct semitone. The result was Auto-Tune, which Hildebrand's new company, Antares Audio Technologies, released in 1997. Marketed to recording engineers, it was presented as a revolutionary tool for fixing minor pitch problems in post-production. Before Auto-Tune, correcting a sour note was a laborious, expensive process. An engineer might have to physically slice a piece of analog tape and re-record a single syllable, or use a primitive digital device that often made the voice sound synthetic and unnatural. Auto-Tune's genius was its speed and its subtlety. By setting up parameters for the key and scale of a song, an engineer could essentially push a button and have the software instantly nudge every note into perfect pitch alignment. For the music industry, this was a godsend. It saved countless hours of studio time and money, and it allowed producers to salvage an otherwise brilliant emotional take from a singer who might have flubbed a few notes. In the right hands, used with a light touch, Auto-Tune was an invisible magic wand, preserving the natural texture and nuance of the human voice while erasing its imperfections. It was the ultimate secret weapon for creating the illusion of flawless vocal prowess. The tool's destiny was forever altered just 1 year after its invention, thanks to a conscious decision to use it not as a corrective device but as a deliberate sound effect. During the recording of Cher's 1998 comeback single, Believe, producers Mark Taylor and Brian Rawling were experimenting with ways to create a distinctive, futuristic sound for the track. They ran Cher's vocals through a hardware version of the Antares Auto-Tune unit, but they did something radical. They turned the retune speed setting to 0. This instruction told the software to correct the pitch not gradually, as it would to sound natural, but instantly with 0 delay. The effect was jarring and robotic, creating the now iconic vocal sound where Cher's voice seems to leap between notes with a digital glitch, completely stripping away the natural slides and vibrato that characterize human singing. The story goes that when they first played it for Cher, she was initially horrified, fearing it sounded like a mistake, but the producers convinced her of its unique, ear-catching quality. They were so protective of their new sound that they initially lied to interviewers, claiming the effect was created using a vocoder, an older synthesizer-based device to protect their trade secret. When Believe exploded onto airwaves, that robotic vocal effect was the single most talked about element of the song. It was bizarre, cold, and utterly compelling. Listeners were fascinated and repelled in equal measure. The single became a worldwide phenomenon, topping charts for weeks and cementing Cher's status as a pop innovator. More importantly, it introduced the world to the sound of Auto-Tune as an artistic choice, not a hidden fix. The floodgates were now open. Throughout the 2000s, the effect, often called the Cher effect, became a staple in pop and dance music. But its most significant and controversial adoption came from the world of hip-hop and R&B. artist T-Pain, born Fahim Rashad Najm, heard the potential in that robotic sound and built his entire artistic persona around it. He didn't use it as an occasional gimmick, he made it the central character of his music. On hits like Buy You a Drank and Bartender, T-Pain's voice was drenched in heavy auto-tune, transforming it into a melodic, synthetic instrument that floated over the beats. He used it with a musicality and flair that no one had attempted before, treating it not as a mask for poor singing, but as a new kind of voice altogether. This widespread embrace of the effect ignited a firestorm of debate about authenticity and cheating in music. Purists and many established artists were openly contemptuous. In 2009, Jay-Z released the song D.O.A. Death of Auto-Tune, a blistering track that framed the technology as a crutch for talentless performers, rapping, "This is anti-auto-tune, death of the ringtone / this ain't for iTunes, this ain't for sing-alongs." The criticism stung, particularly for T-Pain, who felt unfairly maligned for his artistic choices. The backlash created a cultural divide. On one side were those who saw auto-tune as the enemy of raw, genuine talent, a digital trick that undermined the value of years of vocal training. On the other were those who argued that it was simply a new instrument, no different from a distortion pedal for a guitar or a synthesizer for a keyboard, a tool for creating a specific emotional and sonic texture. They pointed out that critics had said similar things about the electric guitar and the drum machine in their day, dismissing them as inauthentic novelties before they became fundamental pillars of modern music. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in the middle. Auto-tune's journey from secret studio tool to overt artistic effect created a strange dual existence in the 21st century music landscape. In its subtle corrective mode, it became utterly ubiquitous, used on virtually every major pop, country, and rock record to some degree. It was the industry's dirty little secret, ensuring that every voice on the radio met a standard of pitch-perfect precision that was once humanly impossible to maintain consistently. At the same time, in its exaggerated, robotic form, it evolved into a dominant aesthetic, defining entire subgenres like the melancholic sound of emo rap, pioneered by artists like Travis Scott and the late Juice WRLD, who used the effect to convey a sense of digital detachment and emotional vulnerability. The story of auto-tune is the story of technology outpacing tradition. It forced a conversation about what we value in a vocal performance. Is it the technical accuracy of the notes or the raw, unfiltered emotion in the delivery? By giving artists the power to sound perfectly human or intentionally synthetic, it blurred the lines between the natural and the artificial, creating a new sonic palette that continues to shape the sound of our time, proving that sometimes the ghost in the machine isn't a flaw to be fixed, but a new voice waiting to be heard. In 1977, a radio telescope at Ohio State University known as the Big Ear recorded a 72-second burst of radio waves so powerful and seemingly artificial that the astronomer reviewing the data, Jerry Amon, circled it on the printout and wrote a single, astonished word in the margin: "Wow." This signal, originating from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, appeared to have all the hallmarks of a potential transmission from an extraterrestrial intelligence, a narrowband signal on a protected frequency, exactly what scientists had predicted a deliberate message might look like. But despite decades of searching, the WOW signal was never detected again. It remains a profound mystery, a one-off blip from the cosmos that teases us with the possibility of contact, a message that arrived but could not be decoded, a ghost in the machine of the universe. This idea of a fleeting, almost mythical signal, a singular piece of evidence pointing to something extraordinary just beyond our reach, finds a perfect and haunting parallel in the obsessive world of rare record collecting. This is the culture of the record digger, the intrepid music archaeologist who spends weekends sifting through dusty cardboard boxes in thrift stores, basement record shops and garage sales, driven by the promise of a discovery that transcends mere commerce. For these collectors, the hunt isn't just about acquiring a valuable object. It's about the thrill of the chase, the possibility of unearthing a lost artifact that feels like a message in a bottle from a forgotten time and place. Their ultimate goal is the Holy Grail, a record so rare, so obscure, and so shrouded in mystery that its very existence is debated in hushed tones on collector forums and in the back rooms of specialty shops. These are not the famous albums by iconic artists. They are private pressings, vanity projects, and local singles that were pressed in minuscule quantities, often fewer than 100 copies, and then vanished into attics and bargain bins, seemingly without a trace. Finding one is the equivalent of a cosmologist stumbling upon the wow signal. It's a direct, tangible connection to a singular, enigmatic moment of creation. One of the most legendary grails in this strange universe is the 1984 album Paralyzed Dream by an artist known only as the Laughing Saint. Virtually nothing is known about the person or people behind this name. The album was reportedly recorded in a home studio, possibly in the Pacific Northwest, and possesses a uniquely haunting, lo-fi quality. Its sound is a bizarre amalgamation of psychedelic folk, early electronic experimentation, and deeply personal, cryptic lyrics that seem to document a profound spiritual or psychological crisis. The cover art is often described as a hand-drawn, Xeroxed image of a skeletal figure gazing at a setting sun, adding to its aura of otherworldly melancholy. What makes Paralyzed Dream the wow signal of American music is its breathtaking scarcity. It is believed that no more than 50 copies were ever pressed, most of which were likely given to friends and family or sold at a handful of local coffee shops. For years, its existence was little more than a rumor, a title whispered among the most dedicated collectors, with no audio evidence to prove it was anything more than a myth. The moment of discovery for a record like this carries the same electric charge of excitement that Jerry Amon must have felt. A collector, perhaps in a small town in Oregon, pulls a stack of records from a dusty box priced at $1 each. Flipping through worn sleeves of common gospel and polka albums, their eyes land on a plain white jacket with that distinctive handmade drawing. The name, the Laughing Saint, means nothing. Paralyzed Dream sounds unfamiliar, but something about it, the obscurity, the sheer oddness of the presentation, triggers a collector's instinct. The purchase is made for a single dollar, a transaction that feels utterly mundane. The real discovery happens later, at home, when the record is placed on the turntable. The needle drops and out pours this strange, beautiful, and completely unknown sound. It's a moment of pure archaeological triumph. The collector isn't just hearing music, they are the first person in decades to receive this silent signal, to bear witness to one individual's desperate, artistic cry into the void. And just like the original wow signal, the story doesn't end with the discovery. The confirmation of the record's existence is only the beginning of a new mystery. Who was the Laughing Saint? What were they trying to express? Why did the music disappear so completely? The few copies of Paralyzed Dream that have surfaced now trade for astronomical sums, sometimes reaching $5,000 or more, a price tag reflecting not just rarity but the immense cultural weight of the artifact. The album has been digitized and shared in the deepest corners of the internet, allowing its strange beauty to be appreciated by a slightly wider audience, yet its origin story remains stubbornly opaque. This is the final, poignant parallel. The wow signal is a message whose meaning we will likely never know, a question mark hanging in space. The Holy Grail record is similar. It's a powerful artistic statement whose context is lost to time. It offers a profound, intimate connection to a forgotten soul, but it is a connection that ultimately raises more questions than it answers, a beautiful, haunting signal from a musical universe we are still only beginning to map. But for all the manufactured pop stars and digital ghost stories, The original outlaw spirit of rock and roll radio was embodied by a single, gravelly voice that seemed to travel on the night air itself. Born Robert Smith in Brooklyn, the man who would become Wolfman Jack was obsessed with the raw power of radio from childhood, listening to the rhythm and blues broadcasts that crackled across the airwaves from distant stations. He found his calling not on the respectable clear channel frequencies, but in the legal gray area of the border blaster stations. These were massively powerful transmitters located just across the Mexican border, operating beyond the reach of American regulators, pumping out 100,000 watts or more, a signal so strong it could be picked up in cars and homes across the entire continent after dark. It was from one of these stations, Zurf in Ciudad Acuña, that Wolfman Jack unleashed his persona upon an unsuspecting America. His voice was an instrument of pure sonic mayhem, a low, guttural growl punctuated by howls, cackles, and frantic pleas to get naked. He wasn't just a disc jockey. He was a shaman of the airwaves, a mythical figure whose face was unknown but whose presence was felt by every teenager tuning in under the covers with a transistor radio. This flamboyant persona made him a perfect fit for one of the most iconic depictions of American youth culture. When George Lucas was crafting his nostalgic masterpiece, American Graffiti, he knew that the radio was the heartbeat of the film's cruising culture. He didn't want just any voice, he wanted the real deal. Lucas personally tracked down Wolfman Jack and convinced him to appear as himself, the mysterious sage of the station, broadcasting from a hidden trailer. The film immortalized the Wolfman not just as a voice, but as a symbolic figure, the connective tissue linking all the characters on their restless night of adventure. This mainstream exposure cemented his legend, leading to television appearances, more syndicated shows, and a career that spanned decades. Yet he never lost that renegade edge that came from his border radio days. He was the living link to a wilder, less regulated era of broadcasting, a rock and roll outlaw who had become an institution, which makes the circumstances of his final broadcast so strangely poetic. In July of 1995, Wolfman Jack was in his home studio in Belvedere, North Carolina, recording his nationally syndicated show. It was a weekly ritual he had performed countless times. He signed off with his trademark gusto, howling into the microphone one last time. The work was done. Shortly after finishing, he went to visit his son in the next room and suffered a massive heart attack. He was pronounced dead at the scene at the age of 57. The bizarre synchronicity was inescapable. The man whose life was defined by his voice on the radio had spoken his last words into a microphone for an audience before his own heart fell silent. It was as if the persona could not exist without the performance. The moment the broadcast ended, the man behind the myth had no more reason to continue. This final act added a profound layer of myth to his legend. In an age where DJs are often anonymous playlist curators, Wolfman Jack was a larger-than-life character whose departure felt scripted by some cosmic dramatist. There was no long decline, no fading from the spotlight. He went out at the top of his game, his voice captured on tape for one last show, creating an eerie and perfect finale for the rock and roll outlaw. His final broadcast wasn't an ending. It was a ghost station suddenly going off the air, leaving behind only the static and the echo of a howl that would forever define the wild spirit of American radio. And so, our journey through the back alleys and forgotten studios of American music history comes to an end. We've stood at the crossroads with Robert Johnson, witnessed the fiery end of the Misfits, and been rickrolled by the entire internet. We've seen how a technical glitch can create a national scandal, and how a courtroom can become the unlikely venue for revealing a song's true soul. But these 33 stories are far more than just a collection of strange footnotes or bizarre trivia. They are the essential, humming power source behind the entire machine. If the official history of American music is the polished, finished symphony playing in the concert hall, Then these are the sounds from the basement rehearsal space next door, the arguments, the broken strings, the accidental genius, and the glorious, unscripted chaos that truly gives the music its life. What these tales reveal, above all else, is the profoundly human element that drives every note we hear. The ambition of a Frank Farian creating Milli Vanilli, the desperation of a Syd Barrett losing his grip on reality, the defiant joy of Patti Smith rewriting a classic in her own image. These are not the actions of distant icons, but of people. They are stories of risk, of ego, of heartbreak, and of moments where sheer, dumb luck changed everything. The unpredictability is the point. Music isn't a science, it's an alchemy of talent, timing, technology, and often total accident. The fact that a song about a grandma being run over by a reindeer could become a holiday standard, or that a failed Australian single could find its purpose decades later in a presidential campaign, proves that there is no formula. The most enduring parts of our culture are often the ones that nobody could have ever planned for. This is the hidden soundtrack of America itself, a nation built on big ideas, wild contradictions, and a constant, restless energy. The music reflects that. It's messy, innovative, rebellious, and sometimes deeply weird, just like the country that created it. These bizarre stories are the proof that our culture is alive and kicking, constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted by each new generation. So the next time you hear a song that stops you in your tracks, don't just listen to the melody. Ask yourself, what's the secret behind this one? Because chances are there's a story waiting to be told, a story of a strange twist of fate, a backstage secret, or a moment of pure, beautiful weirdness that helped shape the sound you love. Now we want to hear from you. What's the weirdest American music story you've ever come across? Share your own hidden histories and bizarre tales in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the strange, make sure to subscribe for more journeys into the unexpected corners of American culture. The encore is just getting started.